big pharma funding these studies, and you barely have NIH funding any of these studies. And so where's the funding going to come from for questions that people don't want to ask? I guess you know a lot about that with the research.
Might have some sense of that.
Yeah.
It's almost a way of saying we can't be like actual... I'm stopping myself from saying...
We can't be objective scientists.
Yeah, it's basically saying objectivity is too expensive.
Yeah. Thinking that GLP-1s are coming on their white horse to save everybody is going to kill us as a country, as an individual, as a medical practice. It's not the answer. Now, it's in addition to the answers we have. It's one of the best weight loss drugs we have ever had, but it is not the answer, but it can have a role in the answer.
I regularly park way out because I don't want to do it's always weird to me when you circle the parking lot several times to try to get a good spot.
Right.
No.
Especially when it's at the gym, when you're about to get into the treadmill.
Tell me who you are and what you do.
Bret Scher. I'm the medical director, well, a couple of medical directors now. I'm the medical director of Metabolic Mind, of Bazooki Group, and the Coalition for Metabolic Health. I'm a cardiologist by training and still practice cardiology, but my main focus is on metabolic health and ketogenic and metabolic therapies to improve metabolic health.
You're normally in my chair. I'm normally in yours.
That's right.
You've done, I don't know, how many interviews?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I've had 3 different podcasts over the past decade, so I've done quite a few interviews. And, I think I've interviewed you probably more than anybody as an individual. The most honored times. Yeah. And I always say, I would do that job even if nobody listened, because it's just such a wonderful opportunity to talk to amazing people and experts and for me to learn so much. It's great sitting in your chair. It's a little harder sitting in my chair, I think.
I have to agree. Actually, I find this is sometimes you can easily go on autopilot. But I really do want to get into your backstory because almost nobody ever gets to hear about it. So how in the world does a cardiologist ultimately become medical director of Metabolic Mind?
Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning. When did you first know that you wanted to be a doctor, really?
Oh, gosh, that one goes back a long time. My dad is a doctor, and I would sometimes go, he's a radiologist, I would sometimes go with him on weekends or at nights, and I was just sort of in awe of this medical world and being able to just help people, and especially radiology, to be able to see inside the body is so cool to see what's going on. And then, in school, I was always into the sciences and I was an athlete. So in my mind, I was going to be a sports medicine doctor, 100%. So I went to college, medical school, 100% was going to be sports medicine doctor. And then somewhere along the way, I just got lured into cardiology. It's just such an incredible mix of taking care of the patient longitudinally, sort of like a family practice doctor, managing cardiovascular risk factors over the long run, having the ER experience. Someone's having a heart attack right in front of you, everything's on fire. You gotta act quick and have that adrenaline rush. And kind of like a surgeon, you're doing procedures, not, super long, 5-hour surgeries, but you're doing procedures using your hands. So it's a great mix of all of those and a great way to help people and sort of engage in their lives in different aspects and help them in different ways. So that really sort of won me over pretty quickly. But then it takes another turn, right? And so not only how does a cardiologist become the medical director for Metabolic Mind, but how does a cardiologist who did his fellowship in an Ornish-style, fellowship preventive program now become a low-carb and ketogenic advocate? And so that's really the turn. And
you're speaking Dean Ornish.
Correct.
A lot of people may not know who that is.
Oh, okay, so good point. So he is one of the biggest medical vegan advocates that, any ounce of fat in the diet is going to kill you. Obviously, that's a overstatement, but that's not much of an overstatement. And so he's been an advocate of and he's a cardiologist. So he has established a preventive cardiology program that includes a vegan diet. But here's the thing, we ran this program, and it was all about getting people to stop smoking, getting them to start exercising, getting them to utilize stress management, building a community of individuals. And people love that stuff. And then there was the vegan diet part, which, they sort of tolerated to be part of this program. And people did well in the program, but the problem is when you say, see, look, the vegan diet is what's helping these people. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of, whether it's Dean Ornish himself or the media surrounding his programs, tends to portray it as. But really, it's multifaceted. They're getting more attention. They're getting more hand-holding. They're getting better medical treatment. And they're getting stress management, exercise, community support. So anyway, so I love that part.
And so where were you at that time in your own opinion? Like, for example, if I were to have talked to Bret Scher, dare I ask, like, what time this was, roughly?
2000? 2001?
2001?
Is that right? Yeah, somewhere around there.
So let's say I approach Bret Scher. You're in residency by this point?
This was fellowship.
Fellowship, okay. So I talked to fellow Bret Scher and I go, I'm curious, how much of each of these things you just mentioned, ceasing smoking, getting more exercise, how much specifically does the plant-based diet matter for heart health, given your best estimate? Because I have to be honest, Doc, I'm not so sure if I'm as interested in a plant-predominant diet. What would you have said then?
I would have said it's crucial. Yeah, I would have said it is the key. And that's just the way we're taught, right? And it's the diet that helps lower LDL. Full stop. Don't need to consider anything else,
So if I'd said then, okay, well, I've got a diet. It's not plant predominant, but it does keep my LDL down. Would that be okay?
Interesting. I mean, I think I would have been interested in it, but still there's the lore of the vegan diet, the low-fat diet, that in itself, by definition, is beneficial for cardiovascular disease. And I want to kick myself now for even admitting that that's what I thought. But that's, it's when you're a resident or a fellow or a student, you're very impressionable, right? Like you're learning from these luminaries in your field who are the experts, who've been doing this for decades, who write the papers, who do the research, who write the guidelines. That's exactly who you want to learn from, or at least who you think you want to learn from at that moment. I've got no experience, right? And unfortunately, the critical thinking part is not, or certainly was not, as valued, I would say. Here's an aside. I remember as a chief resident, so this was right before fellowship, one of the interns, so very beginning, just out of medical school, came up to me and we were talking about when to replace a heart valve for aortic stenosis. And the guidelines were, if you're not symptomatic, you don't replace it. And he's saying, well, why not? Like, you're healthier, you're younger, and it's going to get to that point. Why don't you replace it now before you get sick? And I was just like, I didn't want to hear it. I was like, no, the guidelines say this. Fast forward to now, they're replacing it much earlier now than they were back then. Techniques are a little bit different, and the philosophy is changing. So that's the perfect example. I wanted to shut down his critical thinking because it was against the guidelines. Now the guidelines have changed because of people doing critical thinking. And so we need to, I'm going off on a tangent here, but we need to.
That's what this is for. Tangent away.
Yeah, we need to build that up. And so I don't think we do that nearly enough. In fact, frequently we sort of bat it down. And so I was at a point where I wasn't, analyzing things critically. I was trying to be a sponge and soak everything up from around me. So that was the low-fat vegan diet as being the diet for heart health.
Well, I do want to entertain your tangent for a second, because guidelines are, I think, arguably very well-intentioned. It's meant to be a streamlining, if you will, of experts in the field to try to help clinicians so that they don't have to work as hard at doing the research, the hard work that they've done, to make it in a more digestible form so that they can then pass it on to the care of their patients. But you zeroed in on what is also a bit of a problem, right? Because we want that so much because we'd like to not have to think about things. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to practice medicine in a cookbook, follow the guidelines. It tells you what to do type of pattern. It's exhausting to have to critically think and do a deep dive into every patient, every situation, every encounter. It's a lot easier to check, and move on. And that allows you to see more patients, to help more people. It allows your hospital practice or your medical practice to survive and do better. And, it's a win-win, right? Until you talk about the personalization of care, and now you're treating one person like everybody else, and to do those guidelines and that data actually apply to them, and what is the quality of it, right? All these layers that is much easier not to go into. But once you see those layers, it's like, wow, how could we have ignored them? Because those are such critical layers for you, the one individual I'm talking to right now as my patient.
There's also kind of an implicit assumption, I think, that all of us have with guidelines or institutions, which is if there's a change to be made, it's going to happen. That if there's a change in how the field is thinking of something, that we should see that develop in the guidelines quickly.
Quickly?
Well, that's what we would hope, right?
Yeah, that's what we would hope, but it does not happen. I mean, it is painfully slow. You can quote like it takes 17 years for practice to change. I've heard the fastest is like 7 years, but the average is 17 years or something like that. I forget the exact numbers, but it's painfully slow either way. And the old saying that practice changes, policy changes one death at a time, because people make their whole careers about a certain area of research and a certain stance, and they work their way up to be in charge. And it's hard to change your mind and to admit you were wrong and that the work you had done for decades, there's a better way or a different way to do it. That's hard to do. I acknowledge that. But it still needs to be done so often. And I think the groupthink mentality, the way it's always been, the dogma, there's a lot of power to that. And that's a problem that we're facing in medicine.
So let's go back to the timeline. This is early 2000s.
Yeah.
You're fully on board with what would arguably be the standard of care.
Sure.
Guideline supported.
Sure.
When did you start changing gears?
Well, so in fellowship, you're in a very sort of protected environment still, right? The patients, they're not really my patients. I'm not following them for a long period of time. It's a 3-year fellowship. So the longest you could follow anybody is 3 years. But even within that framework, it's usually much shorter. And you're rotating around among the different rotations. You're doing time in the cath lab and whatever. So it wasn't until I got out of the fellowship into my own practice. Now they're quote unquote my patients. I'm more responsible for their outcomes and their care, and I'm going to see them over the long run. And you see like the effect that you're having on people is not minimal. Like, look, and don't get me wrong, cardiology can do amazing things. If I'm having a heart attack, I need my heart valve replaced, or I'm in severe heart failure, there is no place I would rather be than in a U.S. hospital having the well-trained cardiologists take care of me with the medications and the devices that we have for those extreme circumstances. But when it comes to, well, how about we can do our best to make sure you don't need those, and that you can get healthy and you can reverse conditions and you can improve your quality of life without having to get to that extreme, that's where we're not so good. And that was the realization that I had. So first, that patients weren't getting better as quickly or as drastically as I hoped they would. But 2, nobody, and I mean almost nobody, quote unquote, complied with lifestyle recommendations. The recommendations being reduce your fat, reduce your calories, exercise more. Standard of care, supported up and down by the guidelines. And people don't want to do it. They just, let me rephrase that. Not that they don't want to do it. It's that it's really hard to do. It's, people don't enjoy it. People get cravings. People get hungry. People get emotional. And they just sort of give up. They don't have the support that they would need to do it. And then in the long run, it just doesn't work for them. So they come back, and what do? You check the box that, advised on lifestyle unsuccessful or non-compliant with lifestyle. and then you move on to the drugs. And it was this circular component that just kept happening. And I said, there's gotta be a better way. You know, it's that old analogy. If you're teaching a class and one kid fails and everybody else passes, you're probably doing a good job. But if 90 kids fail and 2 kids pass, it's not the kid's fault. That's when you got to look internal. So that was sort of the reckoning I had when all of a sudden it was, you know, lifestyle wasn't working, diet wasn't working, exercise wasn't working. It's like, maybe it's not them. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's the recommendations. And maybe there's a better way to do it. So, you know, I say it like it was a light bulb that went off, but it was more of a gradual process, which then led me to say, what can I do differently? So I opened a wellness center with a really good friend of mine who is this amazing health coach and personal trainer. And I said, what we need is more time with the patients. We need more attention, right? We need a better follow-up with this health trainer or this personal trainer and this health coach. And yeah, that was part of it, all right? That was definitely part of it, and it helped. But really, people still weren't losing the weight I would hoped. You know, they were still requiring medication for their type 2 diabetes and their blood pressure and their cholesterol, et cetera. But then, fortunately, this was an individual, his name's Dustin, and he had, I think when he was in the Marines, he had learned about ketosis. And he said, hey, how about we try ketogenic diet on a couple of these guys? And of course, I looked at him like he had 3 heads. And I'm like, what, are you kidding me? That's the last thing I want to do.
And a cardiologist, sir.
Exactly. Excuse me. Do you know what kind of training I've had? You know how much schooling I've had? You know, like, and boy, was that a humbling moment, because then he said, well, have you looked into it or read any of the research? No. And I was shocked to see there were actually papers about this, about treating type 2 diabetes, about incredibly successful weight loss, about improving metabolic health, and then about the connection between metabolic health and heart disease, let alone the myriad of other conditions. And all of a sudden I said, and that got me, actually, I shouldn't say I said, I said, and then I said, what the bleep? Like, how did I never learn about this? How is this not talked about? Like, what is going on here? So I was angry and fascinated at the same time. And that led me down this next rabbit hole into the whole low-carb, ketogenic, metabolic health world.
And now I find a lot of low-carb doctors, and particularly cardiologists, they still, it's an uncomfortable road to walk, because, yes, you become aware, doesn't take long, that metabolic health is very relevant towards cardiovascular disease risk, not just all risk,
right?
Cardiovascular disease risk,
right?
So weight loss, but the trade-off, you're eating more red meat, you're eating more saturated fat.
Yeah.
And you know by now, from our own research that I'm, myself a co-author on, that, well, actually, if you're really overweight and you're moving to modestly overweight, for example, actually LDL cholesterol goes down.
Yeah.
But that data only started emerging, I want to say, more prominently in the late 2000s, maybe early. And even then, it hadn't really caught a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Quite like it has, in the later teens and so forth. Regardless, I would imagine it still wasn't an easy switch flip for you.
It wasn't as dramatic as just flipping the switch. You're right. It was more of like, I'm going to dip my foot in the water. But you see them lose weight and you see them feel better. And they start exercising more and moving their bodies more. And is it because they're working with Dustin, who's a great personal trainer, or is it because they're losing weight and feeling better? It was definitely a combination of both. And that had a big part of it. But then when the LDL does not go up and their HDL goes up and their triglycerides get better and their blood pressure gets better and their blood sugar gets better, it's like, what's the worry? What am I worried about with them eating red meat and saturated fat? Like, why would I be worried about that when everything is improving? So yes, this is the population that tends to not only not get a rise in the LDL, but frequently the LDL goes down, especially when you're measuring LDL particles in ApoB rather than just, standard LDL. You see improvements in those with all the metabolic improvements. So it really forced me to sort of look internal and then look deeper at the evidence and say, what am I really afraid of? What is really the risk? And I couldn't find one. All I found was happier patients doing better. And that was really eye-opening.
So was it around this time or was it later that you yourself decided to try it?
Oh no. So yeah, I skipped that part. We're at that time. So when Dustin, sort of opened my eyes and I started looking into the literature and seeing reports, I said, well, I want to try this too. And so I did. And I felt better. I had more energy and I was never, really overweight, but I instantly shed some weight that I could have shed. And I felt good and all my markers improved. And I said, there's something here. So that's when I started trying it on our patients as well.
So naturally, I've got to follow up. Were you as lean as you are now?
Yeah. So yeah, similar. But my LDL did not go up right away, which is interesting. Yeah.
When it did come up, which is where I guess you're going.
Yeah.
How did you react?
Well, mine crept up. So I wasn't the hyper responder that went from 120, 130 to 260 or something like that. I went from 120, 130, 140, 160. So I had sort of more of a time to sort of get used to it and dig into it a little bit more, and had zero small particles, no VLDLs, right? It was all the quote large, fluffy, less dense particles. So, and at the time I was really, and still am, really into sort of the particle size and how that contributes. And so I wasn't overreacting to it.
Even so, the context.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you have a scenario where a cardiologist, starts a new program that ultimately starts adopting low carb for their patients, while also adopting it themselves and seeing their LDL creep up. Did this have any impact on you second guessing this as a possible care decision?
Well, what had me second guessing it was when I did start to see some hyper responders. When I saw patients with LDLs of 200, 250, that's scary as a cardiologist, regardless of, how much you believe in metabolic health and how important it is. There is something just deeply ingrained in cardiology. LDLs of that high are by definition scary. Now, there's an evolution that took place, but that's what had me second guessing. And so in those individuals, there are a number of people early on who I said, well, maybe this diet isn't right for you. And there are a number of people who I said, well, this diet's pretty important for you. And, maybe we should just treat your LDL. And that's all evolved, and continues to evolve over time. There's no one right answer for everybody in that situation. I think that is clear. But it really got my attention. And also, it had me a little worried. I'm gone for the weekend and, or I'm gone for a week and one of my partners, has to cover for one of my patients and sees a note that says an LDL went up to, X number, that's going to make their eyeballs pop out. And I was really concerned about that. And there were a couple patients where, a partner might say, this is super dangerous, you have to stop. And then there were some where they said, well, make sure you talk to Dr. Scher about that and make sure, that's something that's been addressed. So there was, a little bit of awkward interaction with colleagues as well.
That is an important thing to bring up, though, because I think that there are a lot of doctors, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting it, that sort of feel like they're in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
They have an opinion that they would argue is evidence-based.
Yeah.
But there's still a social stigma.
Sure.
That is associated with LDL at certain levels above and beyond what the data is. So it's not just that you might be able to have an intelligent conversation with your colleagues and say, well, I feel like there's actually some decent evidence that you can see, for example, with particle size, which was more of the prominent data at that time, but for which that's not all of what your concern is. There's still just the sense that you might not care as strongly for your patients, your own patients. And when they're your partners, of course, they're going to have an interest in it.
Yeah.
It's a tough, this is why I say this with love in my heart to all my clinician friends. I don't think I could do what you do because that is a very difficult road to walk.
Yeah.
Obviously, I believe the vast majority of doctors came to heal. They mean to do the best for their patients. There's it's unfortunate because I feel like a lot of people in the low-carb space, especially when they feel that the guidelines did not take them down the right route,
Yeah.
and then they're coming back from it. They can think of every conversation they've ever had, I'm sure, you've talked to many of them, where the doctor was insisting they do X, Y, Z, and that was going to get them the weight loss, and that was going to get them on the road to health. And now they got on the road to health from forums, from podcasts, from et cetera. Now they turn against the whole system, including their own doctors.
Yeah.
And I think something you and I are in strong agreement on is that's not where we want to take things.
No.
We want to find a way, and this is where people like you make the difference, to get everybody on board and to reestablish that relationship, but to help the doctors too.
Yeah.
Help bring them up to speed on the data.
But unfortunately, I think, when you look at the people who have looked at this critically and who are really taking the time to treat their patients as individuals and not just react in ways that maybe aren't going to benefit the patient, those are the doctors who've gotten themselves out of that system, which I think speaks to the problems with the system too, that you really cannot practice that way within the broader system of medicine. So the question is, how do these individuals who are really walking that path help the system change, especially when you're outside the system? So we need people from inside the system to help the system change. So, I mean, it's a big statement, like a very general statement, but a big statement too. Like this, it has to change. When you've got 5 minutes with a patient, and then you've got charting to do, and you've got financial incentives to use medications and target specific blood markers, like that system does not reward critical thinking, spending time with your patients, treating them as individuals, working outside the guidelines when you don't think it applies to your patient. Like that is not rewarded. In fact, that is, I don't want to use the word punished because it's not like someone is watching and punishing you, but the incentive structure by not rewarding you sort of inherently punishes you.
And this is the strangest thing to me, is what you just said is not hardly disagreed with. In fact, I'll bet we could grab 100 random doctors, say, do you disagree with what Bret just said?
Yeah.
That there's way too little time with patients. It's not just that it's lowering critical thinking. It's that it's not providing enough time.
Yeah.
You don't get enough time to be a good advocate on the part of your patients to be able to better assess what their circumstances are to provide better care. Because in order for the model to work, you have to turn around patients at a faster rate. So it seems as if we have this broad agreement, like everyone agrees.
Yeah.
This system can't work in the way that is, but yet how is it going to change? How do we get there?
Right. And look, I mean, we don't need to turn this into a big policy discussion, but if you change the incentives, you instead of getting paid for checking the boxes of treating a marker or starting a medication, you get paid by how the patient does, how much weight they lose, what their blood sugar is, or how much medicines they get off, or how they stay out of the hospital. But the problem is that takes a long time, right? That incentive could be years down the road. And with people changing doctors and changing insurance companies, and it's hard to build that in, right? So then you go to a national healthcare system like Canada or England. Well, they've got plenty of problems too, so I'm not sure that's the right solution, right? So I'm not a policy expert. This doesn't have to be a policy discussion, but you can see how it's not structured correctly. But I love the idea of outcome-based care. Anybody can say, this is the right diet, right? The dietary guidelines say, the ACC, AHA guidelines say, low-fat, higher carb, plant-based diet is the right diet. Well, instead, if we said, well, what matters is your patient going to lose weight, maintain the weight loss, and do it in a way that improves their metabolic health and lowers their blood pressure and, increases their triglyceride or lowers their triglycerides, increases their HDL and gets them off their diabetes medications, then all of a sudden you're not starting with what you think is the right diet. You're starting with the outcome in mind, and you're going to do whatever works to get you to that outcome. And for a lot of people, that's going to be not the diet that is recommended by regular dogma or by the guidelines.
it's kind of inevitable. We kind of fall into these policy discussions because this is sort of your evolution as a doctor.
Yeah.
So we got to this point where you found something that was effectively against the guidelines. Low carb is typically going to be more likely involving, animal protein, higher saturated fat, things that are regularly vilified in the world of cardiology.
Right.
And in doing so, you're aware that you're taking risks, no matter how you want to look at it. Risks that these guidelines and, potentially things that can come into your license, getting back to your colleagues and so forth, it's not totally distant from your mind.
Yeah.
Even if you're seeing a lot of positive outcomes from your patients, you'd like to think, hey, I can show my patient role.
Mm-hmm.
I can show this new intervention that we've done that it provided benefit. I think that that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
Is it's not just as simple as the guidelines themselves. I think that if doctors are experimenting to the degree that they can be good scientists, and to the degree with which patients themselves are still aware, they can be aware of the guidelines, and they can be aware of the doctor's saying, just so you know, this is what the guidelines have me tell you.
Yeah.
Here's what I found has been working so far with some of my patients, but you know what? We don't have enough studies on it yet. It's been anecdotal. I think a lot of patients, I'm certainly one of them, appreciates that, appreciates having these conversations, especially when I feel that the thing that I'm struggling with is the thing that my doctor is interested in.
Yeah.
And so just like my own path, I want to do some experiments. I want to report the data back, and I'd like that to advance the conversation overall.
Yeah. And that's where we really owe a debt to the clinicians out there who are publishing their practice results. And I mean, when you have a full-time practice and you're busy taking care of patients, and then take the time to, collate the data, analyze the data, write it up, submit it to a journal, do the revisions. I mean, that takes so much time. Or pay somebody to do it for work that you're not getting paid back for. I mean, that's we owe them a debt. So whether it's, Dr. David Unwin in the UK or Tro Kalasian, like them publishing their practice results is enormous. I mean, it takes a ton of time, ton of effort, but is really eye-opening and shows that there's another way to do it.
I wish that there was a kind of standing award for any kind of solutions that are found that aren't aligned with the guidelines.
Yeah.
Because you could argue there's plenty of money on the guideline formation and the committees involved and the organizations. We should have an incentive out there to keep that research going and to keep finding and innovating new ideas. It could be that there's some, new version of a plant-based diet that's very non-low carb, but that turns out to have great efficacy for diseases we don't even know about yet. I would be just as much an advocate for that research to yield us results that could help some patients,
right?
If it works for them.
Right. And I guess the argument against that is like, well, again, it's the Dean Ornish thing. It's not just the diet, it's the practice, right? So maybe they're just better at listening to the patients and finding out what they really need.
Adherence bias.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe they have, they have better coaches, or they're also doing exercise with the patients, right? So, and that's the way practice should be, right? It's practice is multifactorial. So I guess that's the argument against that. But that's what I care about, right? I care about, the patients getting better. I don't care what diet they eat. I care that they're getting better and that they're finding the approach that works for them. So it often is that multifactorial approach. And so maybe that is the evidence we need. And so what's better evidence, right? The nutrition epidemiology studies that is being used as definitive evidence to frame guidelines, or the multifactorial, many variables, individual practice showing a result and showing that maybe there are different ways, right? Dean Ornish's patients got better. Okay. David Unwin's patients got better. Okay. There are two ways to approach it, very different ways, and they both work. So why are we saying there's one way to do it? It's because we're relying on this incredibly low-quality evidence. So I guess that's the other area to get back to our previous discussion about critical thinking, right? It's evidence-based. The evidence says, and we leave it at that, as opposed to the critical thinking of, well, what kind of evidence? How good is the evidence? Is it strong evidence? Will it really apply to this patient? Like, that layer of discussion doesn't exist nearly as much as it needs to.
It's super frustrating
Yeah.
Because I think epidemiology, the data are very important. And I regularly state that it's extremely important for hypothesis generating. And usually when I say that, it's kind of taken as a means of dismissal. Like, oh, hypothesis, so you're trying to say that it's worthless. No, not at all. And in fact, there is one place where epidemiology is quite powerful, which is when the evidence you find observationally actually goes against the existing expectation.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the most common ones that's brought up is LDL cholesterol and longevity. Generally speaking, the people with the lowest LDL will have the worst outcome with regard to, lifespan. Regularly, it's stated that that's probably reverse causality. And it might be reverse causality, except that if you censor the periods of time from when the blood was taken and go further and further and further out, then you should be able to see where it flips and the reverse causality disappears. So as of right now, this, I'm in like the NHANES data all the time, which is the American, it's a large open source data set that the U.S. puts together. I think it's actually the CDC? No, it's the, anyway, they publish that data. You can actually run analyses yourself, and you can find that you can only find that association, but you can even censor 5 years, and now they've got a long enough span, you can censor even 10 years. So that everybody who died within 10 years of when they got their blood work done can be ignored. Now, does that lead me to then say, therefore, low LDL causes an earlier death? You know me by now.
Right.
I would
cannot
not
say that.
No.
Right.
But can I consider that to be strong data against an expectation that low LDL causes greater longevity?
Yeah.
Well, actually it is. It's pretty strong data against that assumption. So it's good for hypothesis generating. If you do see an association, that's worth investigating further with better data, with better studies.
Right.
But also conversely, if you see some data that emerges that seems to push back on a present prevailing hypothesis, that can be powerful too.
Yeah.
But how much do we want to base, for example, our entire diet on these associational studies?
Yeah.
Well,
it's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that's what's so frustrating about the dietary guidelines and the dietary recommendations when it's spoken with such authority, right? Like the evidence is conclusive. We know that this is the healthiest way to eat. And I don't think I'm overcharacterizing it. I mean, I think that truly is the message by dietitians, by medical practice, and by the dietary guidelines. And it's based on such low-quality evidence that you cannot say that. If you're going to say it, you could say, well, there's some evidence to suggest that for some people this might be a healthy way to eat, but it really doesn't tell us much because it's only hypothesis generate. I mean, that's what you should say based on the evidence we have.
Right.
But nobody's going to say that.
Well, let's take a good example. One of my favorites is red meat.
Yeah.
So red meat, I believe, is currently classified as a carcinogen.
It is.
It's classified as a carcinogen. Now, when you dig in deep, it doesn't say red meat causes cancer. It says red meat probably causes cancer.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure if it was red meat. It might be red and processed meat. It was when they stated they looked at 800 studies or something to that effect. And naturally, I want to say, okay, now wait a sec. Has there been a randomized controlled trial that shows consumption of either red meat or processed meat as the single variable?
Yeah.
Right. That's the one variable of interest, just like you would do with a placebo-controlled trial.
Right.
Shows this signal of change. There's, of course, not been a single one. What the pushback would be, they would go, I mean, that's too hard to do.
It's too hard to do. You have to do a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year study. You can't do that.
So, Dave, we need to just make use of the best statistical instruments we have to ascertain what that signal is, because that's the best we can do. It's the best available evidence that we can make use of.
But if the best available evidence is still so poor quality, then you're better off without that evidence, even though it's the best available evidence. Because the only thing worse than no evidence is bad evidence. And bad evidence is sort of like a big term, but I would say overstating the strength of an evidence kind of falls into bad evidence.
Yes, you cannot just say this is the best evidence we could get.
Yeah.
And that then makes it good evidence.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it
Doesn't
good evidence.
make it good evidence.
All you can do is you can say it's possible, given what we've been able to work out with our statistical techniques. And then there can be some debate as to the statistical techniques. My team and I, God bless them, they're very patient with me. But I'm a very hard data, hard evidence kind of guy. I really want to see a strong signal of anything before I can draw conclusions, particularly when it comes to not just there being an association, but I like Bradford Hill.
Yeah.
Bradford Hill's talked about in modern day almost as if he was like a pushover. Like it's very easy to meet a criteria of causality with his assessments. Not true. If you read Bradford Hill, if you read his original assessments, if you look through his papers, he actually had very strong thresholds for which you could, and even then, it didn't have some magic line. It's not like you hit,
Right. It's spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's good because that's how we should think of data, especially associational data.
Yeah.
Some data is stronger than others.
Tobacco and cancer, right?
Yeah.
Observational.
Particularly
hazard ratio, right? Lung cancer, exactly.
Yeah.
Hazard ratios of like 15 to 20, right?
Okay. That's strong.
That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, would it be fair if somebody said, hey, can we really make the claim that tobacco causes lung cancer? I think Bradford Hill himself would say we can feel greater and greater probability.
Yeah.
And feel this is very strong probability. But it is true, without actually doing an intervention, the best we have is the observational data. And that's where his assessments become useful because they can give you some degree of probability strength. But we're still talking about the importance of recognizing that spectrum.
Yeah.
We still have to have it. So it's frustrating to me when clearly there seemed to be a body of people who want to make a value judgment on something like red meat.
Mm-hmm.
They want to say, is this good or is this bad?
Right.
I really need to work with some kind of data to come to a conclusion to make that value judgment. This is the best data I have. And you know what? We've got a lot of smart minds in the room.
Who agree.
I think we can call it a carcinogen.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And I mean, it's the same thing for red meat and heart disease, red meat and type 2 diabetes, right? Like when you have these observational studies with hazard ratios of 1.2, 1.3, with tons of confounding variables and just the food frequency questionnaires, the healthy user bias, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you look at the result and it's like, all right, it's in the right direction. Must be true, right? It doesn't work that way. And then you could say, all right, but what's really the harm? People are smart enough. They're going to know. Well, not the way mainstream media portrays it. And not when you get something that comes out like Eat Lancet for the planetary health diet that says we can have 1.5 eggs per week or 1 steak a month or the equivalent, because we have to reduce animal food to that degree for the world to be healthy, both the environment and the individuals, because we know that animal products and meat are bad for you because of the evidence, right? You can see it it almost seems dystopian, like it would be a fictional movie that you get from point A to point B. Like, no, that can never happen with that level of evidence. But yeah, it's happening right in front of us, and it's really, really disturbing.
It's not just disturbing. We should round back to healthy user bias because it's the single biggest issue we have with observational data.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that for a second.
Yeah.
Healthy user bias, and correct me where I'm wrong here, it's this issue that we're going to have with people who generally tend to make healthier choices.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be more health conscious and therefore have a cluster of different choices that they make that seem to be generally in alignment with what they understand to be the better move for them.
Right. So when you say make healthier choices, make choices that they believe are the healthier choices. So when you hear over and over again that meat is bad, saturated fat is bad, and plant-based is good, and low-fat is good, the people who are going to listen to that message are going to tend to be more health conscious in general. They're going to sleep better. They're going to exercise better. They're going to drink less. They're going to smoke less, et cetera, et cetera. And the studies can try to control for those, which in itself is more like statistical gymnastics to try to control for them, but it also assumes that we can control for every healthy variable. There's no way you can control for every healthy variable. So that's when and look, the people who smoked and got lung cancer probably drank more, right? And they exercised less and they made less healthy food choices. But when the effect size and the hazard ratio is enormous, like 15, it can be enough to override that healthy user bias. But when it's tiny and razor thin, like 1.3, 1.4, no way can that override the healthy user bias that is just inherent in these studies.
So let's zero in more on that, because there are populations, for example, who were otherwise healthy but also smoked when smoking was a lot more prevalent.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't considered to be as risky as it is considered today. So here's a good example. I actually used to date somebody who was a dancer, and she had a whole bunch of friends who were ballerinas. And ballerinas, apparently, at the time that she was taking dancing, I think was in the 80s or something along those lines, notorious smokers. A lot of them liked to smoke, and they liked it because it helped to keep their weight down.
Yeah.
But otherwise had really healthy habits and were in very peak shape. They were like in really good shape.
Right.
You could still see data that's a clean signal for smoking because of that circumstance. The catch is that at the time that the guidelines were changing, like in the 70s, for example, the issue was, yes, when I was seeing in school, skip the steak and have a salad, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing it right next to a poster on, and be sure to get lots more exercise, be sure to check the gym schedule for this, etc.
Right.
It's all together. And at that point in time, I don't know how much one was helping me versus the other. Or if I skipped one of those, if I went to the steak, but then still got the exercise, how much that'd be different. Exactly what you were just talking about. I think there's a genuine effort to try to quote unquote control for these variables. But again, we're getting back to statistical instruments.
Right.
And I don't want to sound like I'm just poo-pooing all of statistics. I'm not. I'm just saying that you can trust more the data you have in hand than you can the data of what you believe it would be if you tried to adjust things.
Yeah.
So all adjustments are based on assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're saying to me, Dave, we looked at populations who do have the steak instead of the salad and who also are sedentary. They don't get the exercise. And I'm like, okay, well, how much of it was the exercise? How much of it was the diet? You're like, well, we controlled for it.
Yeah.
We ran an adjustment model, and we determined.
Which is based on a lot of assumptions.
Exactly. And the me of today would say, so in other words, you're actually making two causal claims now. You're adjusting for one other thing for which you believe you know the degree of causality.
Right.
In fact, for every model for which you said you control for X, Y, Z, those are 1, 2, 3 more things you're making a causal claim on.
Yeah.
Can you, though? Can you actually say that you know how much those 3 things are also causal? I would argue the best way that you can determine or confirm it, first of all, is replication, of course, but also predictive value. If you can actually make predictions based on what it is that you've already determined, now I'm listening.
Yeah.
Now I think you have a stronger case for causality.
Right.
But as you know, metabolism is ultra complex. It's super difficult for us to make predictions now, even against our own data.
Right. Right. And so all of this is critically important. And then once you recognize it, the question is, well, now what? Right now, all these guidelines, all these recommendations, things we've spent decades doing and building up are now worthless. So how do we advise people? What do we tell them? Like, we don't have our fallback on what's the right answer anymore. So what do we do? And I mean, I think we could come up with lots of suggestions, but that's not a comfortable position for, hundreds of thousands of physicians and dietitians and whoever to be in, right? It's a very confusing position. So it's easier to just say, no, this is the way we're doing it, and to believe it and hang on because it's what you've been taught.
This sets up my segue to get back to your story, because at some point between where we last left off, you decide to become a podcaster. What was in your decision-making process to jump in with both feet?
Yeah, the biggest thing was the feeling that, like, I mean, this is going to sound more dramatic than it was, but I've uncovered something that nobody knows about, right? And of course, no, Dr. Westman was already doing research on it, right? And then Dr. Yancey was doing research, and people were doing research and talking about it. But
it was a passion of yours.
It was a passion of mine, and med school, residency, fellowship, never taught it, right? Even though it already existed, I was never taught it. And so I just felt like the world needed to know about it, right? Like, I mean, I transformed my life, my medical practice, the life of my patients, and I want other people to know about it so they could do the same. And not only is it not talked about, if it is talked about, it's talked about negatively, right? Anything that's not low fat, anything that's not plant-based is talked about negatively. So it's actively discouraged. So I just felt like there need to be more voices talking about this, and why not me? And I remember I was in the doctor's lounge in the hospital, and a friend of mine had started his own podcast, and he was like, he's a natural. He's just a conversationalist and has this great radio voice. And he was in college. He was like, he did the sports broadcasting for his college team, and so he was always into that. And I just said, what's it take to start a podcast? What do you have to do? And didn't seem like much. So I'm like, all right, let's give it a try. So I started my own little podcast. And
what year was this?
Oh my God, I'm not great with years.
I want to guess 2017 or 20.
Oh, wait.
I want to guess 2017 or 2018. Sorry. Am I right on that?
Yes. So it was probably...
I don't think it was 2016, because I think I would have found you.
Yeah.
If it was earlier, but...
It was right around then. Yeah. I'll have to go back and look when my first low-carb cardiologist podcast was. And look, it actually, I'm sure it would be hilarious to go back and listen to those podcasts, because there's a learning curve. I mean, there's definitely a learning curve. And I don't know that I was a natural and, hit it right off the bat, and I'm still learning all the time. But gosh, it was a great experience. I mean, I just loved it from the beginning. And like I said earlier, just having these conversations with these individuals and learning from them and being able to engage in a discussion about really important topics, and to try and get this message out there to doctors, to patients, to anybody who wants to improve their health, that there are other ways to approach it. I felt it was meaningful work. And then from there, I was lucky enough to sort of get found by the crew at Diet Doctor, because I went from my little reach of reaching maybe thousands of people to Diet Doctor reaching hundreds of thousands of people, right? So that was a nice jump for me to increase the audience and be part of a great team that really was, at the time, passionate about metabolic health and low-carb and ketogenic interventions for improving metabolic health.
That was 2018, I want to say.
Diet Doctor was probably 2018, yeah.
It was, I remember chatting with you at the time, and while we haven't gotten into you and I meeting, by this point in time, you and I had already had a few different conversations. We enjoyed when we could catch each other in person at conferences.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctively, tell me if you remember this, I think we had a couple interviews on what was then the Low Carb MD, because I don't think...
Low Carb Cardiologist.
Low Carb Cardiologist.
Yeah.
Just before I'd had the interview with Dr. Peter Attia, which was just before Low Carb San Diego.
Okay.
Low Carb San Diego happens, and then, Bret, I talked to you about this podcast. And then both you and I went for like a big loop, out away from the Wyndham, I think is where the hotel was.
Yeah.
But I remember it wasn't long after that, I think, that you told me, oh, I have to tell you, Diet Doctor's going to have a podcast. I'm going to get to host it.
Yeah.
And you were so excited about it because, yeah, at that time, Diet Doctor, I mean, it was sort of it was just kind of the echelon, if you will. It was if there was like a central magazine, if there was a major website, it was just robust with all it. And it was where I sent literally everybody.
Yeah.
If I had some talk about low carb, I would ultimately end with go to Diet Doctor. They've got all the guides, they've got all the videos, and they're just constantly churning out more and more stuff. So when there was going to be a podcast, like an official Diet Doctor podcast, I was stoked.
Yeah.
I was really excited.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, just being part of that team was amazing. I mean, Andreas was so passionate about low carb and keto and metabolic health, but also passionate about following the evidence and about being as evidence-based as we can be and being clear about the quality of evidence, which I think is really important to do. And the rest of the team with Adele Height and Franziska Spritzler and Ann Mullins and I mean, it was just such an incredible team to work with that, you know, I went from being my solo megaphone to a team as part of this megaphone. And it was remarkable. And I think we made a lot of progress. You know, we created CME, we created training courses, the quality of the videos and sharing people's experiences and the visual guides. I mean, they're still, I think, some of the best in the business that exist. So it was a pleasure to be part of that.
I agree. In fact, there was a recent, I can't say I know what the ailment was, but it was something for which we wanted to look up if there was low carb, you know, specific to it. There was a full lengthy article.
Yeah.
The Diet Doctor, you know, cinematic universe that went into that particular condition. I don't remember what it was and just what the existing evidence was.
Right.
And I was happy that I was able to find it.
Yeah. I mean, the attention to evidence, the attention to being specific of the quality of evidence was like nothing I'd seen. And you know, I think it's an example for how we need to follow. Now, I guess, unfortunately, I don't think much of it has been updated in the past couple of years. But still, I think it still sets the standard for quality.
Well, we should probably at least give some degree of mention that Andreas, who is captain of the ship of Diet Doctor, did himself kind of have a move toward the direction of protein in particular, and now more what would be considered SPC or satiety per calorie.
Right.
The catch is that wasn't like fully a new venture. That was sort of Diet Doctor itself kind of moving in that direction. But to his credit, after lots of conversations publicly, including with me, he's kind of had two versions, I guess you could say. Diet Doctor is now still low carb, but maybe not as robustly supported as it once was in its heyday. Satiety per calorie is sort of what they're focusing on now more. And I'll just give mention to, I think it's Hava. Is what the new version is.
Yeah. And look, you know, his statement was he always wants to be less wrong. I remember him saying that a number of times, and you have to keep evolving to be less wrong. So, you know, for him and Ted Naiman, what they see as being less wrong is following the satiety per calorie to be able to help people lose weight, improve their metabolic health, right? Same goals. And it shows that there's more than one way to accomplish this, right? There is not just one way to do this.
Right, which is what we already were talking about.
Yeah.
It's fine if there are multiple ways. I'm going to give a tiny bit of a rant unrelated to them, but relevant overall to, I do feel people like Dr. Tro Kalayjian, as you know, is a good example of somebody who had a fairly lengthy period of time for which he had very poor metabolic health and shares that often online. Very obese and struggling with his weight his whole life, including some very touching stories from before. I say this with love in my heart, truly, for the fitfluencers out there. But a lot of folks, and I kind of put myself in this category, even though I got into a BMI of, I want to say 26, I never experienced like really being obese and struggling with what that is. There are a number of people I know that are like that, who low carb has been a godsend. Not because that's the one and only way.
Yeah.
But because it's just not getting enough lip service. It's not getting enough attention. There's not enough content that's out there. In spite of how much we're told by critics it's everywhere. It's not. There's not enough awareness to it. And so I will say it was a little heartbreaking because I did like when Diet Doctor was just this ever-present force. And I don't want that to sound bitter at all. because I can't thank Diet Doctor enough for being there for us. And, there may be further future rounds of it being stronger still.
Mm-hmm.
But I've met a lot of people like Dr. Tro, who, when they found low carb, they became one of the strongest, most intense advocates ever.
Yeah.
For at least getting the word out, right? It doesn't have to be this false dichotomy that you either need to believe one diet is the best diet.
Exactly.
Or you can promote the low carb diet because it's under recognized and doesn't get nearly the level of attention that we think it should.
Right.
Both can be true.
Both can be true,
and both are true in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And a big question is, what are your goals and what are your struggles and what are your likes and what are your dislikes, right? And I mean, what's your lifestyle like? What's your culture like? Like, all those things fit into the food we eat. And that's complicated. And so for some people, like you said, low carb and keto have been miraculous. And you could ask why, right? Why do those individuals, what is it about them? And whether it's, we're learning so much about the food addiction, the food noise, and how that impacts things. We're learning so much about, insulin resistance and metabolic health and how different diets can impact that. And just the satiety component to it is certainly important. And then the enjoyment of it, the foods that you can eat that you enjoy. You can talk about community, right? That's part of it. All these things factor in that it's not just, eat food. Food is a big part of our lives, and it has to fit into that milieu and still improve our metabolic health and improve our health and help us feel good. And so for low carb and keto fits that for a number of people. And then we haven't even gotten into the, keto as a medical treatment, changing our physiology, changing our metabolism, changing our brain fuel, like so many other directions to go. But we're just scratching the surface now with all this.
Well, that's why I love it. It's almost like we're following a script because you keep setting me up to then pass the ball back to you on each phase of your life.
Yeah.
Now we get to this current phase, right? Diet Doctor, you ultimately headed out of Diet Doctor to this new company, this new endeavor.
Right.
Tell me about Metabolic Mind.
Boy, well, I can still remember when I got the call from Jan Bazuki, who is the founder of Metabolic Mind. And she found me through the Diet Doctor podcast. And she said, we're having our first ever metabolic psychiatry conference. And it was right before the Metabolic Health Summit in Santa Barbara. And she said, will you come mediate a discussion with us? And kind of looked them up and I'm like, wow, this sounds pretty cool. They're like, yeah, I'll come mediate this discussion. And boy, I mean, being part of that conference and hearing her family story and her family journey and seeing all the scientists and clinicians so passionate about changing this mode of practice, changing medicine for the better, and how they were going to accomplish it, and how they were so caring and so passionate. Like, I was sold from the moment I was there. I was like, wow, I would do anything to help this group. So just as background, Jan and Dave Bazuki, their son Matt Bazuki has bipolar disorder, and he had a really rough time in his early to mid 20s, in and out of treatment facilities, in and out of homelessness at one point. Finally sort of safe and treated, but not thriving at all. And he was, brilliant, talented, athletic, and kind of all of that was gone. Even though he was safe and treated and getting the quote unquote best treatment, they tried everything. And then they were lucky enough to find Dr. Chris Palmer, get started on a ketogenic diet. And finally, as Jan says, she got her son back. All of a sudden, his brain cleared and he was back working, living independently, having a social life, and playing competitive chess, right? Playing piano again, all these things that he couldn't do with the best treatment possible. And, you never want that to happen to anybody, to have to go through all those struggles to get to that point. But fortunately, it happened to a family who is incredibly passionate and philanthropic and wants the world to not have to go through the same steps they went through, and said, we want to create this nonprofit to do whatever we can to let the world know this exists, to help fund research, to find more about it, so nobody has to go through what we went through. And so I mean, hearing that story, how could you not want to get involved in that? How could you not want to help them? And to see this one field of medicine changing day by day, and the people within this field who are benefiting, changing their lives. I mean, every day it seems like we get an email or a message from someone who said, this saved my son's life, this saved my daughter's life, this saved my life. I haven't felt this good in decades. And I mean, it's one of the most rewarding things I could ever think of doing.
Well, I think part of the case that could be made here is it's because what we were just now talking about is that a lot of people have a lot of options for weight loss. Some people don't have that many options. But, and I've said this to low-carb audiences, I've said a number of you in this audience right now will ultimately decide you don't want to go the low-carb route and find something that works for you that's better. Why? Because I don't think there's one diet that fits all for everybody. But a lot of times when low carb is discussed in mainstream media, it's for the purpose of weight loss, which, don't get me wrong, has a lot of benefits.
Yeah.
But it's only truly recently, outside of diabetes and epilepsy, and even then doesn't get as much attention for epilepsy,
right,
for which we actually discuss other conditions related to the brain,
right,
for which there could be a benefit with a ketogenic diet, and for which you are rightly making more of a distinction with what should be more directly called ketogenic therapy, correct?
Yeah.
So, yes, now we're talking about something a little different. We're not talking about just a dietary intervention to make you look a little better, right? And that, possibly improves things that losing weight in general would do, no matter what diet you're on.
Yeah.
We're saying, in this case, actually, ketogenic diet is exactly what the doctor ordered.
Right.
Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And it's because it's, I hate even using the word diet. I use it because it's so familiar and it's what people use, but it's so much more than a diet because it's a nutritional pattern and a lifestyle pattern that changes your physiology. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes the fuel you're using or what you're using for fuel. So, 99.9% of this population are predominantly glucose burners. And if you can switch that to become predominantly a fat burner and produce ketones, your whole physiology changes. And your brain can run very efficiently on ketones. And there's emerging evidence and existing evidence showing glucose hypometabolism in the brain for people with dementia and cognitive impairment and people with various diagnoses of mental illnesses. And so by providing that brain with ketones, you are doing a medical intervention that is completely changing this person's physiology and therefore treating what could be considered an underlying contributing cause of their symptoms. And that's way more than a Mediterranean diet, a quote-unquote Mediterranean diet. That's way more than reduce your calories and reduce your fat and exercise more, right? That is it. All that can be part of it if you want it to be, but it is so much more powerful than that.
Metabolic Mind now has, as you as the host, many videos that you posted. Where are the subscribers at this point on the YouTube channel?
Oof, at this point, I think we're at like 83,000.
83,000.
Yeah.
I am curious because you now have you could say we're in the third big chapter of your science communication career.
Yeah.
The first one being a bit more modest with your smaller podcast, then Diet Doctor, where you felt you're already stepping up on a platform that was already far elevated.
Right.
Metabolic Mind, even though it was supported by the Bazookies, was kind of like starting over from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, they like to say they had a splash page. They didn't really have a website. They just had a splash page. And so it was me and Julie Milder from the science side, and then basically Jan and Carolyn, and that was it. That was sort of Metabolic Mind. And now just seeing how we've grown and both in numbers of our audience and in numbers of people within Metabolic Mind. And as we've grown, the passion just grows and the impact we're having grows. And it's been a phenomenal example for me, just the impact a dedicated, passionate philanthropic family can have. Like, to think that this started with one family, with one person's experience, one family's experience, and it grew into this is just phenomenal. It's such an amazing experience to reflect on.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my incredible level of admiration for Jan Bazuki in particular.
Yeah.
I think a lot of very amazing folks have been able to help with the funding and support of the science, particularly when it's affected their family. But a lot of times it comes down to, here's the financial support. Now go forward and get the work done.
Yeah.
Jan is every single day working harder than most of the people we know in this space to move this research forward. And not just in things like holding conferences, which are super important, but quite literally the very expensive part, which is actually getting these studies underway.
Well, and it's so sad that it needs to be philanthropy funded.
Right.
That you don't have big pharma funding these studies, and you barely have NIH funding any of these studies. And so where's the funding going to come from for questions that people don't want to ask? I guess you know a lot about that with the research.
I might have some sense of that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's how she and the family and the philanthropy has single-handedly started this research field of metabolic psychiatry. I guess not started, but really amplified, I guess is the right word, because there were a couple studies here and there that were small or maybe not getting the funding they needed. But now with her stepping in, I mean, the number of studies are exploding.
Last I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's something in the neighborhood of 40.
Well, so there's the studies that we at Metabolic Mind and Bazuki Group are funding, and then there's just the studies in general. And it's interesting to see the studies, even that we're not funding, are increasing because people are starting to see this is a really interesting field of psychiatry. This is a really interesting field of nutrition. Like, we want to study it too. So that's pretty cool to see that growing. So, when you talk about the ones we're funding and the ones we're not funding, I don't even know where those numbers are. But, I mean, it's the next couple of years are just going to be an explosion of data where we're going to learn so much more. And, one of the things I always like to talk about and think about is, what level of evidence do we need? And then the question is, need for what? And I get it. If you are, writing guidelines for how everybody should practice psychiatry or metabolic health, and we can argue how, helpful those are, but you're going to need you should be requiring a high level of evidence. So right now, most of metabolic psychiatry is pilot studies and case reports and retrospective reviews. So that might not make that level of evidence. I get that. But what if you are the mother, the father, the brother, the sister of someone who's not thriving with their treatment for their mental illness, or you're an individual yourself in that, or you're a physician not seeing your patients get better like you wish they would? What level of evidence do you need to try a dietary approach? I'd say we've already far exceeded that from my standpoint of what we need to try a dietary approach to improve someone's well-being.
This is where I'm frankly going to object to the concept of guidelines. Again, acknowledging that they're well-meaning and acknowledging that they have value.
Yeah.
The catch is that it comes at a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
The trade-off is it making it a little too easy, almost providing permission to not look closer to other alternative methods?
It's not in the guidelines. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem is, of course, I've tried to think of things that could be proposed, such as, hey, here's what the guidelines are for what we feel the strongest about. Here's areas of research that look promising. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But frankly, it's just still a problem that there are guidelines, period, for which somebody can say, this is the end-all position that I'm going to hold unless I take my own time to go look closer. But I feel like I'm covered. Like I've done the due diligence that I need to if I just look at this document and stop there.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that in a cold fashion. I, again, acknowledge that these are doctors that are working hard, as we just talked about earlier. They're time limited, right? So guidelines kind of help with that aspect of it. But this is where specialization can be somewhat helpful. If you're a psychiatrist, you should want to get continuing medical education anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. I do feel like if the ketogenic therapy could be in a pill, oh, well, then it would probably get lots of adoption because then it could be sold. And if it could be sold, then there would be more of a budget beyond philanthropic. I'm doing the same thing you were.
Yeah.
Beyond just charitable giving to make that research not only happen, but to also get people to become aware of.
Right. Right. You're absolutely right. And I guess that's where people might push back on a company like Virta Health and say, well, they're just doing it so they can sell their program or whatever. That's why they're doing research. But I mean, that's what it takes to get research when drug companies aren't funding it, when the government isn't funding it, right? It takes a company that wants to do this, that wants to help people improve their metabolic health, right? Or it takes philanthropy. So it's got to get done somehow. And yeah, I mean, we need more of it.
I'm going to switch gears for a second. Before I do, I want to give you a little bit of a margin of, how to put this? I want to give you I want to emphasize that your opinion and mine has changed throughout our lives as data has come available to us. Right. I'm curious, given everything you know right now, which of course will also include the data that I've been getting through the study that I'm currently spearheading. But in this moment in time, you as a physician, what is your opinion of LDL cholesterol?
Quick, easy answer, right? That's a question, quick, easy answer.
Well, part of why I gave that big, long preface was I think that I think every clinician feels understandably defensive about weighing in on a controversial topic, even one that you've chatted about so much before this point. But I also appreciate when a question like this comes forward, where it's like, where are you right now?
Yeah.
What do you feel right now? And take some time to unpack it. And that's what I wanted this podcast for.
Right.
Was you and I, usually when we're chatting, like on your podcast or something, we have to kind of you have a very concise question. I have to do my best to give you an answer that, lands in a few minutes. This is part of why I like this long form.
Right.
Is we can kind of get settled in and really chat things out. But I want to set the stage for you.
Yeah.
To say, I've definitely had some evolution of thought.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you have as well.
Oh, sure.
A lot of the emerging data has been super fascinating. And I myself have, even within the data of our own study, have further things that I think add greater nuance. But I want to start with you.
Yeah.
So where are you at right now?
And I like how you phrased it right now, because where I'm at right now certainly isn't where I was 15 years ago and might not be where I'm going to be 15 years from now, right? So I think we have to always hold the right to change our opinion and should be changing our opinion as, new data and new experiences arise. So, I mean, it's even saying that is still a hard question to answer because LDL is involved in the process of atherosclerosis. All right. I think there's clear evidence for that. Now, I hate the term, LDL is causative because I don't believe it is truly causative the way I define causative, which means, LDL is the number one most important factor that causes heart disease. I do not believe that at all, but it is involved in the process of atherosclerosis. So we cannot ignore LDL. And we should not elevate LDL as the first and most important thing that we evaluate and treat. I mean, I don't care if someone has a diagnosis of hyperlipidemia. I care if someone has a diagnosis of coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, stroke, heart attack. That's what I care about. So for me, that's what I want to prevent and treat. Now, as LDL has a role in that, okay, LDL is important. But there are 1,000 other, okay, maybe not 1,000. There are a number of other things that have roles in those diagnoses and probably more important roles in those diagnoses. But I want to address all of them as much as it makes sense for the patient in front of me. What is their risk? Where are they on this spectrum of vascular disease? How aggressive do they want to be? What are their other risk factors? What are their other medical conditions? And then you come together to say, how should we progress? And LDL is part of that, as is blood pressure, as is blood sugar, as is an insulin level, as is A1C, as is SCRP, as is your body composition, as is your mental state, as is your medical history, as is your family history, and I can go on and on, right? But the problem is that we say LDL is high, here's your statin. And if you ask a doctor, is that the right way to practice? They'd say, oh, probably not. You should consider all these other things. And then you go sit as a fly on the wall in their practice, and because of the constraints of practice, because of the reimbursement strategies, and because of just life as a doctor in this medical world, it ends up being your LDL is high, here's your statin. And yeah, poof, that was a tirade. I'm going to take a break and take a quick drink of water after that one.
No, it's this is what I created a slide for, because I do my absolute best. I don't know how successful I am at it, but I do my absolute best, particularly modern day 2025 Dave, to say my job that I gave myself is to go get this data. Doing my absolute best not to even suggest that I have something prescriptive for you. So it's not even me just saying I'm an engineer and not a doctor, and therefore don't take my opinion as medical advice. Like, I actually try to condition what I say to not seem even suggestive of what I think people should do. Now, what I will say is that there seems to be enough agreement within the team that I work with that I'm comfortable enough passing along what they say, not because I'm endorsing what they say, but because if somebody wants something that they're going to keep bothering me for weeks and months and whatever, here's a slide on what they would say, and that seems to satisfy that need. So what Budoff, Adrian Sotomoda, Nick Norwitz, and I think I also got your sign off on this slide, because you seem to all be coming to the same conclusion, which is step 1, did going on a ketogenic diet result in high LDL? Okay, move to step 2. If in step 2, your metabolic health is good, there's no other risk factors, and you've gotten a scan. The scan comes back showing low to no plaque. Then there doesn't appear to be any data, and I think this is evidence-based. There doesn't appear to be any data that your LDL will be predictive of a future event. Now, added to that, if steps 1 and 2 are not the case, if you have poor metabolic health or you have, moderate to high levels of plaque, then in the case of, I think, everyone that I talked to, you want to take steps. And I don't push into what the take steps are, but of course, some of you are going to say low-dose statins, some of you are going to say enzemime's fine with me, some of you are going to say maybe try other things other than the LDL cholesterol, maybe, but that still ultimately result in lower LDL. I don't know. But I think it's fair to say that of all of you, LDL is still on your mind because it's still a patient that's considered of risk. Would that be fair to say?
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's clear with existing plaque, the impact of LDL is way more important than without existing. Right? I think that's pretty clear. And still not the most important thing, though. Even with existing plaque, still might not be the most important thing. But sorry, go ahead.
No, and this is where I might get myself in trouble because I don't want to sound like I've contradicted what I've just said. I want to be able to say this without getting in trouble because it's just epistemic examination, which is, we know that efforts to lower LDL are not uniform. There are drugs that lower LDL that don't have a benefit. There are some drugs like SGLT2 inhibitors that actually modestly increase LDL, but have a cardiovascular disease benefit. It may well be that lean mass hyperresponders who have existing plaque taking steps to lower their LDL will see a benefit. And we may even be the ones that help get to the research that elucidates that. Possible. It's possible that it doesn't. Part of the challenge is that this is truly a new paradigm because we believe this higher level of LDL is as a result of fat adaptation and greater trafficking, I believe, successfully. And that's a new paradigm. So it is tricky because all of us, including my team and including myself, would agree that ApoB containing lipoproteins like LDL, to get a bit technical, are part of the process of atherosclerosis. So, of course, it's fair to question whether or not you should change levels in the blood. I just want to be able to say I still am in a place of uncertainty. I don't know. And I should be able to just say that without it being controversial.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can say that if you're saying for this specific population, in this specific circumstance, do we have the evidence to conclusively point us one way or the other? And you can say the answer is no, right? But then the question is, well, then what? So what did the doctors do? What did the patients do, right? What's the next step? And that's the harder question.
And that's the difference with us. So I'm not a clinician. You are. You need to act on the information you have. There's a lot of variables that may go into that. I don't. My goal is to still get enough data that I can start to draw conclusions, but interventional data, we don't have yet.
Correct.
We just have observational so far.
Yeah, and this is where, I mean, I will sing your praises and your team's praises to the end of the earth because you're asking questions nobody wants to ask, right? Anybody would say the science is settled. We don't even need to be going there. And you're saying, I don't know, maybe it's not settled because we don't have this, in this situation, the definitive answer. Now, the argument would be, well, we don't have it in left-handed, redheaded kid born the second Thursday of April either, right? Like how much do we need to dial down? But that's when we get into the physiology of things. The physiology is different. The physiology has changed. The reason for elevated LDL has changed. So it's reasonable to ask, does that then impact people differently? And if it's in the setting of good metabolic health, which the majority of our population does not have, so therefore, by inference, the studies that have been done are not on people with good metabolic health. So does that change things? So these are very relevant scientific questions that nobody's really been asking except for you and your team, and not just asking it, but taking the step to make the research happen, which is remarkable. And I think you've gotten a lot of slings and arrows along your path when you should be getting applause and pats on the back for asking scientific questions.
So is there anything I missed? Is there anything else that's changed outside of, let's say, metabolic health and its relevance that you feel is different from, say, the you of not just 15 years ago, but even the you of the last few years with regard to lipids and risk?
Well, I think one of the things that's changed, certainly since my time of training, is where lipids are on the hierarchy of impact. And by default, they're sort of number one. And now I'd put them way down on the bottom of the list, not off the list, but down towards the bottom of the list with, blood pressure, metabolic health, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation probably being higher on the list. Now, you could also make the argument, it doesn't matter where they are. If you really want to take care of the patient, you're going to address everything on that list, right? But I think it does matter because how aggressive do you go? Are there side effects? What are the patient's preferences? Right? All those things play into it. So you do want to, put the big rocks in first, so to speak. So I think what's changed is, for me, is where LDL is on that list. But like I said, it's still on that list. And I can't remember if I said this already or not, but LDL maybe not being, or an ApoB, right? So when I use LDL, I'm using those interchangeably. But LDL not being the greatest predictor of vascular disease and lowering LDL particles for somebody with vascular disease being beneficial can be true, right? They don't have to be one and the same. You can have those as two distinct models, and they can coexist. So I think maybe that's kind of what has changed for me over the years in regards to LDL.
I try to liken it to, for example, let's say walking around the city block that you're in might have a benefit towards cardiovascular disease risk. But imagine I'm saying, Bret, you need to walk every day around your neighborhood block, right? And you're like, well, it's maybe a 1/10 of a mile. And I'd be like, that 1/10 of a mile is huge. It has a massive effect on your cardiovascular disease risk. You might be somewhat skeptical.
Yeah.
What I'm drawing attention to is how much of a benefit do you get from having any of these changes? And as I don't want to give it away, but as I think you have as one of the clips in the documentary, we'll see if it fits it, is perhaps the reason LDL gets as much attention as it does is because there's something that can be done about it.
Yeah.
Pharmacologically. Insulin resistance, that's a tougher one. Arguably a little bit more lately with GLP-1.
Yeah.
But even so, certainly before GLP-1, and this is a place where I think I get a bit more vocal, which is that I have friends and family who are taking steps to improve their metabolic health who need to. And then I have some who I believe need to, but who are taking comfort in having driven their LDL so low.
Yeah.
So it's not just whether or not it's low on the list and whether or not doing something about it has an impact. It's that I don't like that it has such an outsized level of attention that people let it become, in their mind,
right,
the best benefit they could have counted on. So in their mind, it was high on the list, and they did something about it. Now their metabolic health isn't really that important.
Right. So a couple of things on that. So the doctor is never going to say, here's your prescription to lower your LDL. Now you don't have to worry about anything else, right? The doctor is never going to say that. But yet thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of patients are going to feel that just because of the way LDL is talked about, right? So there is that disconnect. And it's very different than saying, here's your prescription to lower your LDL. But more importantly, we still need to address your lifestyle and your exercise and your nutrition and your stress management and your sleep and your blood pressure and your metabolic health, right? That's a different discussion that isn't happening to sort of correct that misperception. The second point, though, is when you talk about we can lower LDL with a prescription, it's easy. We can see it in front of our eyes. Metabolic health, not so much, especially when we are doing lifestyle and nutritional advice based on guidelines, based on low quality data, and based on dogma to say this is the right way to do it, and not doing it based on the outcome. Instead of saying we are going to find the right nutrition and lifestyle that is going to improve your metabolic health, because it does exist and we can do it. We're going to find the right one for you, and we're going to base it on the outcome, not on this preconceived notion of what the best approach is.
This is what gets us full circle. So our documentary isn't focusing on people who are looking for weight loss. It's focusing on people who got efficacy from being on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
So a little boy who had type 1 diabetes, or still has type 1 diabetes, but is using a ketogenic diet to address that. But a number of folks who would be right there in Metabolic Mind. Bipolar disorder with Robin Dobbins. We cover Lauren with her schizoaffective disorder.
Lauren Kennedy.
There's so many stories.
And Jen Unwin with food addiction.
Yeah, Jen Unwin. I so often, like in the case of Jen Unwin, where I'm chatting with her and I'm going, oh, yeah, I can sympathize with a lot of what she's talking about right there. I think that the problem is that you and I, we know at least a number of people who, because they were leaner, they exhibited more the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype.
Yeah.
They saw their LDL go up, and they were getting benefits beyond weight loss.
Right.
the LDL alone was enough
Yeah.
that they determined they needed to abandon the diet.
Yeah. And this is what's heartbreaking about what we hear so often at Metabolic Mind, that, someone had been on 10 different medications and again, wasn't well and used a ketogenic diet as part of metabolic therapies and transformed their lives and had better quality of life than they've had in decades. But their doctor told them to stop the diet because their LDL went up. And how is that possible? They found, not to overstate it, but for them, it could be this miraculous treatment. And you're going to have them stop it because of a lab value. Not because they're having a heart attack and have vascular disease, but because they have something that might potentially down the road increase the risk of that, as opposed to transforming their lives. To me, that's such an obvious disconnect that just gosh, makes me so frustrated every time I hear it. And that's why, new research might be needed to assuage those individuals to change their mind. But really, what I want to do before we have any new research is to say, let's change our perspective a little bit and see what is most important for this patient, what is most important for improving this patient's health and their quality of life. And sometimes it's a ketogenic diet and treating their LDL. And that is not the end of the world, right? So it seems like that's something we cannot do. We do it all the time with medications. Here's a medication. Oh, you have a side effect? Here's another medication we can use to address that side effect. That concept is exactly what we're talking about and exists everywhere in medicine. It doesn't have to be that, but we shouldn't rule that out either.
One of the things that happens a lot in the Facebook groups, the lean mass hyperresponder Facebook groups, is folks will start up a thread to say, here's what I did because I wasn't comfortable with my high LDL. A lot of them are in ezetimibe, for example. Some try different kinds of carb reintroduction. But some people have issues. We'll find they have some benefits from fiber, for example. That's also something I'm honestly a bit proud of on our end, is that while Facebook wasn't exactly the platform I would have chosen, not great in many respects for, say, searching and sorting and organizing and so forth.
Are you listening, Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, it's I hope he can make it a little bit more functional.
He listens to your podcast all the time, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. It is a place where everybody already is, particularly middle-aged and older. It happens to be a lot of people tend to care about their lipids and are more likely to be adopting a ketogenic diet for these reasons. I've appreciated the fact that we've succeeded, I think, at keeping a wide spectrum of opinions inside the group. And so there are definitely a number of people who are LDL skeptics and would say, I don't believe that the higher LDL is of any concern for me, including many people who may already have existing plaque and so forth. But we also have a number of people, including a cardiologist, for example, who's very active and is very pro-lipid hypothesis, but is, providing their own perspective and is generally pro-LDL lowering, has started their own threads and has also commented many times over. I wish that science writ large was like that, because I champion their voices and I emphasize how much I want that group to have that spectrum of discussion. But I've gone to, I'm not going to call them out, but I've gone to, let's say, conferences that you're probably familiar with in cardiology and in lipidology. And let's just say I don't feel like they're welcoming me with open arms.
Well, sure. When you believe the science is settled, right? I mean, how many times have you heard that? We know all we need to know. The science is settled. There's no debate. When you say those sorts of things, you're not going to have open arms to anybody trying to tell you something different or trying to even ask the question if there's something different.
And that's the issue, is it's not, I could understand if there was a concern about, somebody walking through the doors saying you should drink Drano to cure your diabetes or something to that effect.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I bring up this example because I think from their perspective, that's the reaction I feel like I'm getting, that is what we're saying, that, hey, why in the world would anybody be on a ketogenic diet if their LDL doesn't just go to 150 or 160, but 600, 700? Are you kidding me? Nick Norwitz just recently released a video where he came out with the fact that his most recent LDL was, I want to say, 574.
Yeah.
That's up there. That's
up there. Look, it makes me shiver to hear that, right? And I'm on this side of the equation, and it's because of what is our reference, and our reference for numbers that large, that high, is homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. Period. That's it. That's our only reference, and unfortunately, those are the kids having heart attacks when they're young and dying in their teens, right? Like that's our reference. So of course we're going to be paranoid about that type of numbers. Now, fortunately, Nick and a lot of others who have levels that high aren't just saying, I'm fine, don't worry about it, but they're getting scans, they're getting monitored, they're looking at their vascular health because that's what matters. And you have to be open enough to say, if I see a change in my vascular health, I'm going to change my opinion and I'm going to take this much more seriously. As individuals, you absolutely have that right and what you should be doing. But I would advise anybody not to say, don't worry about it, I'm fine, because that we don't have that evidence yet.
And to further extend on that, Nick himself had said that if he had found that he had he's had a CT angiogram completely clear. He will probably have another one at some point.
Yeah.
We haven't determined when, but he has said publicly, if I had gotten that CT angiogram and it turned out that I had plaque, then my decision making would be different.
Right. And is the decision making to stop the diet, or has the diet and lifestyle transformed your health in ways that nothing else did? So the decision is, you go on a statin, you go on a PCSK9, you go on ezetimibe, you go on bempedoic acid, right? There's a myriad of choices for lowering LDL while staying on the diet if that's the path you want to go. So you can still get the benefit of the treatment, which you could not find anywhere else, and mitigate any potential worrisome side effects.
Now, all of this said, we do have an incredibly important data point with our existing study, with the Keto CTA study, and that is that we have no association between LDL and plaque progression. In fact, we have no association with its presentation, its baseline levels, or its progression, how much it changed from scan 1 to scan 2.
Right.
Has that had any impact on your opinion?
Well, I mean, and this goes back to the other statement that its association with progression and the impact of lowering it on vascular health can be two separate questions. So, and that's where I think maybe this study got into some hot water by people thinking it was addressing the second question when it wasn't. It was not just, there's no intervention. There was nothing to address that second question, but that was sort of the assumption to say, oh, so you're telling us LDL means nothing and we don't have to treat it and lower it in people with No, we weren't. Nobody was saying that, and the study wasn't saying that. Well, I shouldn't say nobody was saying that, but the study certainly was not saying that.
It's not addressing that question.
Right, it was not addressing that question at all, not even looking at it. So I think that's where the biggest concern for me is in terms of the reaction to the study. But yeah, I mean, LDL that high, not having a very strong correlation with progression of plaque is surprising based on the pedestal LDL is on. But it comes down to there are two questions to ask and answer, and this was addressing one of them.
Well, and let's unpack that a little bit more. So the present lipid hypothesis is exposure. The amount of exposure to LDL will, as the 2017 EAS consensus statement paper would say, is remarkably consistent with its dose-dependent log linear level of association. What's always interesting, though, and you probably have a keen enough eye that you've noticed, is virtually all the times that we see a meta-analysis-based graph, it's usually exposure to lowering. That's usually the x-axis.
Mm-hmm.
So normally, what you would expect on the x-axis is the more you get of this, on the y-axis, the more you'll have of this. And usually, on these exposure to lowering regressions, it means the more lowering exposure you have, as in lowering of LDL cholesterol, on the x-axis, it's usually the greater the benefit of reduction in cardiovascular disease. So one could say, hey, you know what? It may actually turn out that LDL doesn't have nearly as much of an association with plaque formation as we thought, in spite of how much it seemed to be spurred forward by the work of Brown and Goldstein, because that seemed to have been the strongest case at that time. We haven't seen it enough in population data such that we can just throw it up in a scatter plot and feel like the R2 is going to be fantastic. But we do feel a lot more confident in the techniques by which it's lowered, such that we can throw that into a graph.
Right.
All of this is a roundabout way of saying, if I'm being a good scientist, I could say in that circumstance, it could make more sense as to why it is that there might be benefit from lowering if there's the concern of that in the future, unrelated to LDL levels of having plaque.
Yeah.
So if you're a pharma rep, you got to be like, aha, Dave, you said something I liked hearing, right? That having high plaque levels, even if you had low LDL, could possibly be benefiting not even necessarily from LDL lowering, but from some drugs, as I mentioned from earlier, that might also have the results of lowering LDL.
Yeah.
Part of why I bring this up is, and I brought this up before, again, I think that a case can be made for, as you know, anything that might pleiotropically improve metabolic health, even the slightest amount. Let's say I had a drug that made people just a teensy bit nauseous.
Yeah.
Right? So that they ate just a little bit less, not even a lot less. Let's say 300 calories less a day.
Yeah.
Right. Would I be surprised if two things were true? If the intervention group both saw a lowering of LDL and saw a lowering of cardiovascular disease risk.
Right.
I wouldn't be.
Wouldn't be. But you can't say it was the LDL that lowered the cardiovascular risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I now know enough to be able to say metabolic health changes your lipid profile. Not just being fat adapted on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
If you or I become more metabolically unhealthy, our lipid profile will change to one that's more like atherogenic dyslipidemia, which often has marginally higher LDL and often much higher ApoB.
Right.
Right.
And that's where it's really important to talk about ApoB versus LDL, especially in that population with poor metabolic health.
But now we have an issue. We have a confounder. And the confounder is the drugs that ultimately can result in lower LDL. We would want to know how much of that lowering might be related to something that's pleiotropic. If that pleiotropic component is also what's related to the drop in cardiovascular disease risk.
Right.
So,
and I mean, beyond pleiotropic, so, you know, the most common pleiotropic is like the anti-inflammatory aspect of statins. But beyond pleiotropic is the mechanism, right? Because if you're improving clearance of LDL, especially if you're improving clearance of LDL that tends to have a long residence time, is that specific situation different from other ways of lowering LDL? So I guess it's a roundabout way of saying, why do you have high LDL, right? Is it because you don't have enough LDL receptors genetically? Well, that's going to be a different situation than your LDL increased because of your dietary changes. It might have nothing to do with the receptors on your liver. Those are two separate situations. So will the reason for it, and you're nodding because this is a question you've been asking, but I think part of what's so interesting is now because of your work and because of the studies and the attention, we are now hearing about other scientists starting to say, well, I want to learn about this, and independently wanting to look at the mechanisms of why LDL goes up in this circumstance, because it may then eventually inform, is there higher risk? What do you do about it, et cetera? But it's, again, starting this process of digging deeper and asking the questions that haven't been asked.
Yeah, the timing of this is so chef's kiss, because you and I were just in a meeting right before you flew here.
Yep.
A one-of-a-kind meeting, because you and I have not had a situation that's emerged in all this time where a researcher, separate from our teams, some people we didn't even know, decided to take on the quote-unquote GEM hypothesis. and is also doing a tracer study with it.
Explain that hypothesis for people.
So let's let me set the table on this. Basically, this has been the hypothesis I've had for, I don't know, 7 years, 8 years, pretty much since lean mass hyperresponders I was first publishing, which is that I speculate that if I went down the road to a gym and I found people who look like us, who were probably cardio, they like to cycle, they like to run, that kind of thing. They were not big lifters. I'll get into why in a moment. That if I could grab a bunch of them, kidnap them, and then force them on a generally carnivorous diet, right? Very low fiber, low carb overall, basically put them into ketosis, that the vast majority of them, maybe 75, 80%, would exhibit the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype. They would have the cut points of extremely high LDL cholesterol of 200 or higher. That's the one cut point, but also HDL cholesterol of 80 or higher, triglycerides of 70 or lower, or close in that triad. An extreme triad that you do not normally see. And this is what it comes down to is I'm making a strong claim that it is not genetic, which is what a lot of people have been assuming up until this point, that whenever a lean mass hyperresponder appears, some genetic abnormality. The most prevalent one I hear now is that they're hyperabsorbers. That's the assumption. Well, we can look at that. We can test it. But no, the gym hypothesis, the best way to test it is to quite literally just do that experiment, get a nice large number of people for which the BMI is already lower and for which we can, recruit them. Hopefully they've never been on a keto diet before, so they're keto naive.
Yeah.
And then see how many of them change. My preferred time is 4 weeks. As the current design of the scientists we talked to earlier is, I think it's 3 weeks, so that should actually get them close to the triad.
Yeah.
I don't think it's 100% conversion, but I do think it's 75 to 80%. That's what I've been on record for saying for a long time. But the reason this is so exciting, is because this is a strong claim.
Yeah.
This is a claim that this is quite adaptive. It's not a claim on the risk. It could well be that the higher LDL ApoB actually has a detrimental impact on cardiovascular disease, et cetera. That's why we're doing this other study over here.
Right.
But the mechanistic study to do like this gym hypothesis study, what people can't appreciate is, like a lot of tracer studies, they're expensive.
Yeah.
There's so much money. It's a lot easier for me to raise money to say, hey, is this risky?
Right.
Because people want to know that a lot.
Right.
The mechanistic side, that's interesting, Dave, but that's nerdy stuff I can't get into as much. Fortunately, somebody outside of our teams was like, hey, I'll take it on.
Yeah.
And having the paper up there helped, because the lipid energy model paper that this is based on, we've had published since 2022. So a little over 3 years later, somebody picked up the ball. And that's exciting.
That is exciting. And the fact that it's being done in humans and not being done in rats and mice, and because that's just another layer of separation that really doesn't help. So if you're saying, what I want to know is it risky? Starting with mice and rats really tells you nothing. You can even say the mechanisms, okay, I don't care, I want to know if it's risky, but the mechanism, I think, is what are going to help translate into helping us figure out some element of risk and figuring out what to do about it if there is higher risk. So the mechanism certainly set the stage. It's not science for science sake, although it's incredibly fascinating from a scientific perspective, but it's sort of setting the stage for future interventions and future research and the question of what do I do about it.
Now I want to move over to the vibe. So again, I'm talking about the state of where you are, Bret Scher, right now. Are you feeling more hopeful, not quite as hopeful, given the events of, say, the last year, as to whether or not we are achieving a greater level of success at getting good data for the ketogenic diet, especially for ketogenic therapy out there?
Specifically about lean mass hyperresponders?
Not just lean mass hyperresponders,
okay.
In general. So lean mass hyperresponders, I feel like that's almost its own category.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost kind of on its own track.
Yeah.
It is very relevant to whether people adopt the diet.
Yeah.
But as far as research writ large, which we're just a component of it,
right?
I'll be honest with you. I flip back and forth, sometimes within a week.
Yeah. I mean, the quality of data for ketogenic interventions, like you said, I mean, we are seeing, look, my inside baseball experience at Metabolic Mind, the quality of research being done is phenomenal. And it's in large part due to our team led by Dr. Julie Milder, who has created this community of scientists and researchers coming together to help each other and sharing their experiences and their expertise and to help each other's research. And they've, to a person, they've all exclaimed that I've never been part of this type of collaborative research community, never. And it's phenomenal and they love it. And this collaboration is more than they've ever seen and is helping elevate the research. So that's fantastic. But I think maybe what you're referring to, then at the same time, you see a publication that says, this rat study proves that keto diets are dangerous and cause fatty liver disease and are going to cause premature death. And you're like, wait a second, it's a rat study where they use 90% fat, 10% protein, almost zero carbs, and all this, synthetic feed stuff. And it's in rats who are physiologically very different. And they're like an inbred, like so many layers removed from humans. And we have human data that shows the exact opposite, that fatty liver gets better with ketogenic intervention. So how are we taking this data so far removed and elevating it to the point of conclusions? Or then you see a headline that says low carb and keto diets, cause or lead to heart attacks and premature death. You start reading about it, or lead to cancer. 40% of the calories are from carbohydrates, and that's low carb. And then that gets equated to keto. That is such poor reporting, poor science, poor understanding of physiology, but yet doesn't impact the headlines. Like, that is incredibly frustrating. So I assume this is what you're referring to. On the one hand, incredibly hopeful, and on the other hand, so disappointed with the way it is presented. So yeah, it's a little bit of both.
I feel like the second just has more traction. And again, I don't mean to say this as a pessimist, because I think structurally, I'm super hopeful. I feel like we have more of the facts on the side for the benefits where they are appropriate. And again, you and I are doing our best to remain nuanced, to not hyperbolize or bumper sticker this thing as though it's just the best there is.
Yeah.
But do I think we're going to continue to find more and more efficacy with keto? I think so. And I honestly think it's not just as simple as keto for everybody as soon as you can. I think a lot of times what we're ultimately finding is that we are, in our modern food environment, breaking our bodies. And there can be a lot of debate on how we do that. But the break seems to be helped in many cases by the removal of carbohydrates and moving the body more towards fat metabolism. Again, in many cases, not in all cases. Ketogenic diet, for example, can be very helpful for many to the extent to where they can go entirely off medication, but not always.
Right.
Sometimes it takes a combination approach,
right,
for example. And sometimes it doesn't work at all. But the studies that have been coming out just in the last year and a half from Metabolic Mind, or at least the ones that you've also supported, have really been head-turning. But I don't think they get nearly as much press as the negative, bashing keto, low carb is terrible for you. I feel like it's just a big headwind.
No, you're absolutely right. Because anything that's against the low-fat, plant-based bias is not going to get the attention. And that's unfortunate. But it's just all the more reason why we have to do this and why we have to shout it from the rooftops and why we have to create free CME, which we've done at Metabolic Mind. We've helped others create free CME activities that doctors can go and learn about it and get credit. Every doctor needs to get a certain number of continuing medical education credits. And we've put it up there for free. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about working for a nonprofit, and an incredibly philanthropic and motivated nonprofit, is we're not putting it up there saying, how are we going to make our money back? We're putting it up there to say we need to educate the world of doctors about this. So we need more of that. And we're going to continue doing that. We hope others will too, because we need to, education is key. And And, doctors, if they see something on YouTube or see a blog, they're more likely to dismiss it, I'm sure. But if it's a certified continuing medical education program, hopefully that'll get their attention. So that's something we've been very focused on.
So I'm not sure if this is too much inside baseball, but if you're able to comment on it, can you speak much to how well, or maybe not so well, these papers are getting published, as far as what journals, how they accept it? Does there seem to be at least a broader acceptance by the journals themselves for studies with keto?
I guess that's a tough question because there are two variables. One is that a ketogenic diet is involved, but two is, to this point, they've been smaller pilot studies. So New England Journal of Medicine isn't going to publish a 25-person pilot study. Well, actually, they probably have, but certainly in this type of field, they're not going to publish a 25-person pilot study. So that's one variable. So yeah, unfortunately, these studies aren't being published in the highest impact journals. But that's okay. Science has to start somewhere. You can't start with the 5,000 person randomized controlled trial, right? Especially when it's not being drug company funded. That's not where you start. So you got to start somewhere. So I think that's okay.
It is a challenge though, because when I was starting out in the research with lean mass hyperresponders, everything was about the impact factor of the journal we would ultimately end up in. And my opinion's really shifted on that. I think social media has been the great equalizer. As long as you do the study well, as long as you get good data, good execution, then you can count on people in general being able to evaluate it, at least those in the know, who can care about how it's done. That's the key. Do good science, and then if the impact factor was relevant with regard to how much it was going to get circulated by other scientists, I don't know. I don't know how much. There's still a sentiment there's still a sentiment degree with how they're taking the nature of the research you're doing itself. I think a lot of that's going to come down to more of the interaction you directly have. And for that matter, how big it gets on social media.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just don't see a way to get around that.
Well, and I think we have seen clear examples that, it's a lot easier to publish something that agrees with the status quo than it is to publish something that disagrees with it, because the magnifying glass and the attacks are going to be astronomical when you disagree with the status quo. It's going to be looked at so much finer, with a fine-tooth comb, as opposed to something that agrees will just sort of be accepted, right? So there is that discrepancy. So from a journal standpoint, I don't know, maybe they are asking, do we want to put ourselves to this level of scrutiny or not? I don't know if they're asking that question, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were.
But that does get to the heart of the major issue, is both our sides of the research, and even if it's around the same diet, the headwind is also just how much there's that ingrained thought process. The very thing you were talking about earlier in this interview is that there's such a knee-jerk reaction in defense of the status quo.
Yeah.
Science.
Yeah.
Science is supposed to be.
Science is supposed to question.
It's supposed to challenge.
Yeah.
You should be the most excited about something that breaks up an existing axiom that we're all getting wrong.
Right.
And yet, I don't know. I feel a lot of the present environment of science is very protective of the status quo by the way it is set up.
Oh, man. And we can dig in on this. I get my Journal of the American College of Cardiology, on a regular basis, and I open it up, and what's the first thing I see? A drug ad. They're taking money from the drug companies. Hey, they've got a bottom line. They've got to fill. Is that ethical? Should that be? Should the journal that's reporting science be taking money from a drug company? Is that going to influence the science they promote and publish? You could certainly draw a line from A to B saying that maybe not. I don't know. I mean, maybe it is influencing it. So I would say they shouldn't be doing it. So any organization that issues a guideline, any organization or journal that is reporting science should not be taking money from companies that have a vested interest in the science that you're putting out.
I don't see how that could even be controversial.
How could that be controversial? Yeah, it's rampant everywhere.
And I'm going to be talking...
I guess the controversy is, well, where are we going to get our money from? That's the controversy. Well, you got to learn to not need so much money to do it differently.
It's almost a way of saying we can't be like actual... I'm stopping myself from saying...
We can't be objective scientists.
Yeah, it's basically saying objectivity is too expensive.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need to just go ahead and, farm out a little bit of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't imagine anybody could sit in your chair and say, it has no effect on us at all. It has no bearing on any decisions we make.
Yeah.
Or at least, I don't know. I would hope nobody would feel like they could say it that way. I'm going to be having Emily Kaplan on at one point. She's part of the Broken Science Initiative. And I watched some of her recent talks. A lot of this is just sticks in my head because it's a lot of the things that I have observed and have felt some concerns about. And yet at the same time, I keep struggling to find a way to be a good actor on behalf of where I think the bad actions are happening, because I don't think it's always by design.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's people are just after the bottom line. They just want to get the money.
But by design or not, does it still have an impact?
Exactly. And that's the thing. We should be able to acknowledge that we found ourselves in a position of a system that unfortunately does get influenced a great deal by the money that underlies it.
Yeah.
And in the case of lipids, it's especially prominent because there's one hypothesis that structurally holds the whole thing up. And yes, our research with lean mass hyperresponders is at least challenging the simplistic version of that hypothesis. That's how I like to say it.
Right. I like that.
Because if the simplistic version is high LDL, high risk, discussion is over. Right. I definitely think our pilot study is already providing powerful evidence against that simplistic version. Do I want to be a good scientist and say, could there be more to the story beyond the simplistic version? Sure. But then there needs to be a larger talk about that. The issue is that I'm more than aware that every scientist I'm working with who's a board-certified lipidologist like yourself, but particularly if they're in research, where's the money coming from? It's not from this one little tiny minnow of a study. Maybe if there was a foundation behind me and I had, I don't know, billions of dollars, and I said, we have another 80 in the queue, Mr. Scientist, that you'll be on next, that might be relevant. But it shouldn't be, Bret.
You're right.
It should be that scientists already have the skill that they've been honing to care the most about coming to the objective truth, or at least as objective as it can be. And the frustration that I feel that I've, expressed many times, not only in this podcast, but to you personally for the last how many years now, is that I feel like we're kind of more defaulting in that in engineering than we are in the field of science.
Yeah.
Because in engineering, paradigms go up and down every day.
And they're tested 100 different ways.
Yep. Okay, good example. Consumer Reports, if I'm not mistaken, is not advertiser driven, or it has ever been advertiser driven. They may have changed that, but as far as I know, it's subscription only. That's what I think journals should be.
Yeah.
They should just be, and it may be a very high subscription, but I would expect that would be better, because then you know that the advertising can't be an influence.
Agreed.
Moreover, I think peer reviewers should be paid.
Sure.
And I think their names should always be on every paper that they're a peer reviewer.
Absolutely. Their name should be involved. They should not be anonymous. Yeah.
I have all sorts of opinions, and I don't want to get into a rant, but there's so many ways in which the system can be, I think, unfortunately gamified, such as run-in periods, such as powering things to events versus time periods. There's a lot of things I have strong opinions on.
Yeah.
But it all comes back to, more than anything else, the scientists running the show. So those journals, I don't like when you tell me that. The first thing you see is advertisement for a drug.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the science in the following pages.
Yeah, I mean, so there's the cover of the article or the cover of the whole journal with an overlay over it, which is a drug ad. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, one of the biggest wake-up calls for me is, I believe it was in 2018 that I attended my first NLA conference.
National Lipid Association.
And I, again, I'm conceding my naivete. I went there thinking that we'd be all talking about science. And no, I mean, a good 3/4 of the conference was about what the latest drug was and what the studies around the drug was. Again, I want to be fair. And say, hey, if you feel like the question has already been answered, now the only part is what's the best way to do something about it.
Sure.
And that's what those drugs are about. And I'll further emphasize, it doesn't change the fact that there are so many drugs that come from pharma that are saving lives. That ad that you saw may be saving lives. It's still a separate consideration from the objective evaluation of this data.
Mm-hmm.
That's science. We still have to care about
that. Yeah. I mean, would it be any better, though, if the overlay was like a steak and broccoli? I sort of think that'd be better, but I don't know. Like, is that the same risk?
I personally would be against any kind of push for a particular intervention in a magazine that purports to be a journal for science. You should. And again, that's on the journal. The journal themselves should be like, oh, we want to be the journal that, by the way, since I'm throwing the basket of different things, another one that I really wish, and maybe I could talk the bazookies into starting this journal, but there should be a journal where you register the trial design. You may even negotiate with the editors in advance, but you register that first, and then as part of the registration with the journal, not just with clinicaltrials.gov, but with the journal, they then agree that they will publish the results, whatever they are.
Whatever the results are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you take the pressure off the trialist to come to a positive outcome. They'll just come to whatever the outcome actually is.
Sounded.
Yeah. Now, granted, it's a little less attractive to the journal because they're the ones who are driving this bias more than anyone else. But then you absolutely can count on a greater degree of science, because now the trialists don't have to worry as much about what the results are or form fitting it or coming up with different things. By the way, this isn't my idea. This is one I read. And when I read it, I was like, well, of course, this should be all of them now.
Right.
And this is one of the other issues, is that I didn't realize this too until I was getting into this. And we were talking about trying to write a grant to do the study. Given the amount of work, there's a crazy amount of work in writing a grant to get a study, to get funding for a study. But you basically design the study and then submit that to get the grant.
Yeah.
Then you end up ultimately having to rewrite it again for the journal. It should be
one in this
right once. And again, if you can talk to the journal first, you can say, what do you get? Because every journal has different flavors of what they're interested in based on the editors. What do you agree would be the right questions? Let me work with you and even with our would-be peer reviewers in the future, what the best design would be.
I mean, you've thought about the integrity of science far more than I think most of the people who are, deep into this and been doing it for their careers. And that's where your perspective on so many things is important, because you are the quote unquote outsider, right? You're coming in with the engineer mindset, the engineer background, and the incredibly curious mind, and the integrity to say this has to be done right. And this field is in need of.
To be fair, some of these, including the registration first, is an idea that I lifted. It's easy to connect some of these dots.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right that even for where I'm lifting it from existing scientists, they're usually scientists who are writing an article that gets hardly any circulation, which is why whenever I bring this up with anybody, they've never heard of it before. Two, and this I think may be the darkest sign, in my opinion, is a lot of times you hear a lot of ideas like this from people who are retired from science.
Interesting.
So they're aware of the problems, but do not feel the freedom to say much about it, much less do much about it.
Good point.
And that's really concerning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I recently had a podcast episode with David Ludwig and Gary Taubes where we were talking about science and specifically, the Kevin Hall study, the 2-week crossover study of ultra-processed foods, which was lauded as, by so many as one of the greatest nutrition publications and one of the greatest studies. And when you really look at it, it's kind of worthless, to be perfectly honest, because it's 2 weeks without a washout, and there was a huge time effect occurring within those 2 weeks. Like so many ways you could pick it apart, but yet something...
Let's unpack this one a little bit, because this is a good one, right?
Yeah.
Because it also gets into the themes we were just now discussing.
Yeah.
As you know.
And so the reaction, how can the reaction to the same study be in one group saying this is one of the most impactful and greatest nutrition research studies, and another group saying this is totally worthless and should be retracted and thrown out and has no impact on human beings and what we eat? It's the same.
So we don't have the study handy, but I'm going to try to summarize this aspect of it. This aspect of it is they recruit a number of people. They separate them out randomly into one of two arms. One where there was a diet that was not low carb and then followed by a low carb diet. One that was a diet that was low carb first and then followed by no. And it was 2 weeks for one of the interventions followed by 2 weeks of the opposite intervention. And what was fascinating about that was it was kind of broadly used against low carb.
Mm-hmm.
But it turned out that the diet order, whether or not somebody had last been on the low carb diet for the first 2 weeks or not, was relevant to the next 2 weeks. So that midpoint where they flip from one to the other turned out to be very relevant. Whereas in a lot of experiments, there's usually a washout period, which is to say you did one intervention, and maybe if you did the other intervention second, there was at least a period of time for which you went back to whatever your baseline diet was or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that diet, that study, because what I was thinking of was the diet very similarly structured with ultra-processed foods versus minimally processed foods. But I think it's important to bring both of them up because, again, that was even the low-carb one versus high-carb one was lauded as being sort of like a nail in the coffin for low-carb diets. Again, for 2 weeks that they were eating this diet, I don't care what happens to you in 2 weeks. I care what happens to you in 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades, right? And within those 2 weeks, the amount that they were eating was drastically changing from week to week. So when you have a variable moving like that, what's going to happen in the future? You have no idea. And there's this huge carryover effect with no washout, right? So holes in the study all over the place. And the same structure was used for this ultra-processed food versus minimally processed food with the same findings, right? No washout period. There were changes within the weeks, and yet lauded as being such an amazing study. And it comes down to, it's really hard to do these studies. It's expensive. You have to control what they're eating. How can you do that for months at a time, right? That's the response. So this is what we have. So this is our evidence we have, which goes back to exactly what you said before. Like, just because it's hard doesn't mean you accept bad evidence as being the gold standard.
And this is where I got to give a lot of credit to Ludwig. Ludwig runs these studies that are long.
Yeah.
He does not, and of course, costs a lot more money, takes a lot more work to get a lot more money,
right?
To plan them, to get the participants to agree to them.
Yeah.
But I got to say, the data has been pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And I just feel better about all studies that can be longer in general.
Right. So, without going on a tangent, it sort of brings us back to, how do we interpret the science that exists and apply it to what should we be doing to make ourselves healthier? And it's not answered. It's not clear. We have to keep asking questions because the science that exists does not adequately address all the questions we need to know for our health.
I want to, while it's in my mind, I do want to ask, Metabolic Mind right now does have a lot of beginner guides, right, for starting a ketogenic diet.
Well, we have a lot of beginner guides for, right, if you have a psychiatric diagnosis or mental illness and you want to start a ketogenic diet, we have a lot of information out there about how to go about doing that. Sure.
Okay. And for that matter, there's also more studies in development at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be fair.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's such an exciting time. Again, it's kind of like what I say with my research. I would love if more people just picked up and got interested and were doing good studies around lean mass hyperresponders. I feel the same way, of course, with ketogenic therapy,
right?
And not even just necessarily with the brain and metabolic mind disorders per se, but also with all of these other possible disorders that might have relevance.
Well, which leads us to sort of our new venture is the Coalition for Metabolic Health, where I have the privilege of now being the medical director, another brainchild of Jeff Mizuki and team, that's saying, what we've done in Metabolic Mind for psychiatric disorders, what if it could be scaled to metabolic health in general? And with people talking about nutrition and metabolic health now on a national stage, is that something that there can be some influence by a group of experts? So we've convened exactly that, a group of experts, the clinicians, the scientists, the nonprofits that are motivated to improve metabolic health and to elevate it as a primary focus of national policy and of the way we practice medicine. So that we can, whether it's improve the quality of research or improve the political discussion around nutrition, or the way nutrition is funded and the way insurance companies reimburse it, or how metabolic health is practiced, right? We want to be involved in that discussion as much as possible because the time is right. Medicine needs an overhaul, under the watchful eye of medical organizations and government policy. We have seen obesity, diabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, fatty liver, we've seen them go one direction and one direction only, in the wrong direction, despite experts being committed to preventing that or reversing that. So at best, they've failed to prevent it. At worst, they've contributed to it. So we can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So the time for change is now, and the Coalition for Metabolic Health is hoping to have a role in that change for the better.
I think it's been publicly announced it's $50 million endeavor. Is that right?
Well, that the Bazookies are committing $50 million for this improvement in discussion in metabolic health for the Coalition for Metabolic Health, and independently for funding research along these areas. Man, yeah, I mean, that just shows their passion and their generosity to, again, just wanting to change the world and make the world healthier. It's pretty impressive.
I told Matt himself, who's been a prior speaker at our fundraising conference, Collaborative Science Conference, COSI, for which you'll be a speaker again for our third and final one. He's also, by the way, going to be a full speaker.
Oh, great.
The next one. I told him this, so I feel like he'll be okay with me saying it now, but in the same way that, I lament anybody having any kind of illness, but at the same time can appreciate if that something good came out of it. Nick's ulcerative colitis, something good that came out of it is he's now fully on board with helping us get this research worked out. Right. Same thing with Matt. Matt, I would not wish upon anybody what he had to go through, but wow, what generosity we've seen from the Bazookies that ultimately resulted from seeing what benefit he could get and how much that could be shared with the world.
Yeah.
So it's true. I mean, you and I, before the story of Matt Bazooki, knew what struggles there were in the low-carb community to just get this research done and move it forward.
Right. And, even if it's not a low-carb focus, if it's a metabolic health focus, that's a move in the right direction for sure. Like there was a couple recent papers looking at redefining what's obesity. So not just based on body mass index, but body mass index plus something else like waist circumference, waist to height ratio, waist to hip ratio. And if you redefine it that way, the prevalence of obesity goes from 46% to 68% of the American population.
Wow.
And if you ask me, that's a much better definition, because now you're including body composition, or roughly body composition, which is going to reflect metabolic health better. So even something like that, I think, is a step in the right direction. But the question is, what do we do about it, right? And if the answer is going to be GLP-1s and prescriptions, and that's going to help a lot of people, sure, but how long is it going to help them? What are the side effects? What's it going to cost? So that's where we also have to phrase the discussion, well, what other lifestyle interventions that we haven't tried yet, quote unquote, on a broad scale level that has the potential to impact this, should we be talking about? And that's where I think the Coalition for Metabolic Health can also talk not just about metabolic health, but talk about this intervention of low carb and ketogenic and metabolic therapies that are going to be beneficial.
What's your opinion right now on GLP-1?
My opinion is, for the right person, they are miraculous, right? I mean, for people who have tried everything and haven't been able to lose the weight and improve their metabolic health, they can be miraculous. Now, what does it mean to have tried everything? And how long can we expect someone to stay on these medications? And how are we going to afford it? And what are we going to do about the side effects? And what are we going to do about the data that shows, real world data that shows only a third of the people are still on it at 1 year, right? Those are all things that we have to consider into this equation, and not just say this is going to get us out of our metabolic disaster that we are in right now, because it's not. It's not going to. But instead, we have to use it as part of the treatment plan, which includes lifestyle interventions, including considering low carb and ketogenic interventions for the population that needs to lose weight and improve their metabolic health. So thinking that GLP-1s are coming on their white horse to save everybody is going to kill us as a country, as an individual, as a medical practice. It's not the answer. Now, it's in addition to the answers we have. It's one of the best weight loss drugs we have ever had, but it is not the answer, but it can have a role in the answer.
When it first came out, I myself said publicly, different people have different needs, different, again, meeting the patient where they're at. If it works for a number of, for example, challenge cases in my family, then so be it. But by the same token, I'm just going to say this about any study for which we don't have long-term human trial data.
Yeah.
We don't have long-term human trial data. I don't want to disrupt somebody else's health journey, but I do want to say virtually every drug since I've been in this space that has sounded like the next new miracle drug usually has trade-offs that are not as obvious in the beginning.
Yeah.
By the way, it gets back to the things I was talking about before, such as run-in periods. It's a whole nother topic we'll save for another podcast.
Yeah.
But it is a problem when everyone, it's not just the drug companies. I think that the physicians and the patients want it to be the next big thing. Sure. Want it to be the miracle drug they had been waiting for. I definitely know people who, if they felt like they could just take the shots for the rest of their lives and there wasn't going to be any side effects, that sounds like a great trade-off. If they could, have their pizza and donuts and
right. It's when you normalize pizza, donuts, cake, sugary, fruity drinks. And when you normalize that, then it's like, sure, I want to keep doing that and then take the medication. But that's not normal. Like, how did that become normalized? That's the crime. So if we can get rid of that is no longer normal, then we won't need the drug as much. So definitely perception is a big problem.
I was surprised also just how quickly a number, not a lot, but a number of doctors who I'd also been connected with this whole time when it had come up were believing that it was meant for long term.
Yeah.
Just even without having the data in yet, that now they're going to have patients that they'll just keep on it indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with my respect and appreciation for everybody who's having to work with this struggle, I wish there were just more talks like David Unwin's.
Sure.
David Unwin puts it so well because it's a stock speech for him with his patients. He says, hey, you've got choice to consider. on one end, you could be on medication for the rest of your life. And here's what that would involve. And here's, if you develop this symptom, we may try a drug with this symptom and so on and so forth. Or you could try tackling this with lifestyle and talking out what the tackling with lifestyle is. And I think when facing the choice, this is why he says his track record's been so strong with people ultimately at least wanting to try the lifestyle. But a lot of times they just don't get presented that option.
Right. They don't get presented the option. And I mean, we also have to be honest that it can be very difficult to change, right? And that's sort of the delicate part of this discussion is people say, well, I tried it, and it didn't work. So is that my fault? Am I weak now? And it's totally my fault? And I should be ashamed of having to use the drug? No. I mean, look at the way society is set up, and look at the way these food stuff, it's not real food, is formulated, right? It's all hacking biology to make it incredibly difficult. And so not only do you need the discussion up front, but you need the understanding that it's not your fault. It might not work the first time you try it, that the deck is definitely stacked against you, and that we need to try different ways to help you overcome that. So having that discussion like Dr. Unwin does is crucial, and that has to be part of that discussion as well, that change in mindset.
I have to tell you a fun little secret kind of along these lines. And I got permission this morning from him to share it, but I can't say who he is or what it. There's a friend of mine who has a small company, and he basically treats carbs like smoking. In the office, it's a low carb office.
Yeah.
And it's recognized as part of the as part of the employment. It's a small company. And it works out that most of the people were already kind of that lifestyle interest. But that's actually part of the deal is you can't bring carbs into work.
Yeah.
You can't bring carby food to put in the kitchen or anything along those lines. And you can still have carbs, but you have to take them outside.
Yeah. That's great. Like the smoker's area, you have the carb area. Yeah.
And he and I had such a great conversation because something I had said from a while ago was, I guess, an inspiration for him, because I regularly state that I think at least not necessarily carbs, but at least added sugar is like the cigarettes of our era.
Sure.
Because I think that there's a lot of folks who treat added sugar at a minimum like they did smoking in, say, the 50s or 60s. They would say, yeah, I know. Smoking isn't good for you, but it's not. Like, my doctor smokes more than I do. That was a common kind of statement.
Yeah.
It'd be minimizing. You'd minimize how much it really had an impact. And so I need to have my Frappuccino in the morning. I mean, all these other people are getting a Frappuccino, right? Like, so getting back to that normalization, this is part of where I feel like food companies have kind of helped us into this mess with terms like empty calories.
Sure.
Well, yeah, it's not nutrient to have pizza, but it's just empty calories. This Coke is, it's got a lot of calories, but they're empty calories.
Empty meaning not beneficial, but not harmful. Just
but not, right. They just totally they're like filler.
Yeah.
Right. But no, for those of us who get the broken body, right, it's that breaking thing.
Yeah.
We get insulin resistance syndrome. Still lots of individuality there. Yes. Still lots of people who may just lose the 5 or 10% body weight. Then all of a sudden they can be on a lot of different diets. But then there are some people like myself or my dad or many of my other family members who just need to keep the carbs at least low enough.
Yeah.
I can metabolize carbs better than my dad, and I've taken advantage of that. But like my dad is a great example of somebody who has to keep his carbs really low. Mm-hmm. I have other family members who they need to, because they're just at that level of insulin resistance.
Yeah.
Pathologically.
Right.
I think there's a lot of debate that can be had for how you get there. But set that aside for a moment. What do you do when you are?
What you do when you're there. Yeah. Well, and just to circle back to what your friend's doing in his companies, I love what he's doing. But there was a study somewhat similar to that at UC San Francisco, where what they did was they just took the soda machines out, and you couldn't get soda at work. You could bring soda in if you wanted, but they took out the convenience. And I forget the exact time frame, but people lost weight and improved their metabolic health just by removing the convenience of it, which really shows, like, you know, it doesn't have to be a complete overhaul to have small benefits. Now, to have big benefits, you're gonna probably need a lot more. But just a step like that, why, when you walk into the hospital, are there soda machines and vending machines with all the junk? Why is that, you know, at the rec center where kids go to play basketball or volleyball or whatever, there's all the junk in the vending machines? Like, it's ubiquitous. It's just what we do. It truly is the frog in the boiling water. That
just like smoking.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like having the cigarette machines there.
Yeah.
It part of having the presence of the machine is itself part of what I think makes it more normal, makes it permissible.
Yeah.
And this was also my issue with, I had a recent, I hate to say it, but I had a recent person in my circle who had to visit the hospital. And I visited them at the hospital. And honestly, I was appalled by a lot of the food options.
Absolutely.
It's the hospital, right? It's the place where if there was any, I mean, it's not for lack of the money floating around. So it's not like you need to cut the costs in order for, it should be the place. Like, if there was any area for which you not only should have it for the treatment, but you should have it for the habit forming, and hey, this is what's appropriate in a place where you need to work on your health.
Exactly.
I think that's one of it's one of the places where I have some of the biggest issues, and particularly where I had a very different opinion on what the person I cared about who was in that hospital bed should have been having.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucks because a lot of times when they're waffling, but that's what's being served to them.
You're right. The doctors are okay with this. Like, what could be wrong?
Right.
Yeah.
If the doctor was standing over there going, yeah, sorry, this is not, by the way, when you leave here, don't eat this.
Yeah. Well, these are just all examples coming back to how the deck is stacked against you. And, you know, so when you want to say blame or fault, like, no, like, when you walk, everywhere you go, you see those vending machines. Everywhere you go, you see support for these foods and normalization of these foods. Like, the deck really is stacked against you, which sounds depressing and defeatist and like, okay, well, there's nothing we can do about it. But that's what I'm saying. There are things you can do about it. You just have to change the mindset and the understanding of what's normal and what's healthy.
Let's move to exercise. How important is exercise?
Crucial, so important. But what is exercise? I think that's the harder question. And, you know, you previously you said meeting people where they are, which is so important for everything, but especially for exercise. You know, what's exercise for me and you is not going to be exercise for someone with type 2 diabetes who's overweight and hasn't exercised in 10 years. But it's equally important for both of us. So, yeah, I mean, I can't overemphasize exercise enough in terms of its importance.
I feel like exercise, so when I started this, I thought it was 50% diet, 50% exercise. It might even be possible that it's closer to something like 50% diet, 50% exercise in adolescence. I think in adulthood, it's really more like 80-20. But that 20% of exercise, exactly what you said, crucial.
Yeah.
And there may be a point of diminishing returns, but for which, if you can at least get up to a certain amount, you're in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
I am at least good. I used to run more. And I never got the runner's high. I jokingly say it's probably a hazing ritual that people claim that it exists.
It exists. Trust me.
I've never had it.
But I love it.
But while I don't run, I do make a point to walk every morning.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone. I'm trying to both actually get the exercise and also get some freaking sunlight, because sunlight's crucial. But more and more I was like, I'm just not getting resistance training. And so Dr. Ben Bokikio, connected with him, he talked me into doing this thing that sounded ridiculous. There's just no way that in 15 minutes, twice a week, I could get enough resistance training. But to the credit of his system, and without going into in detail, I've actually been getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
With just literally 15 minutes twice a week.
And not just stronger, but I imagine your body composition is changing.
Yeah.
Increasing lean muscle, which is more metabolically active, and little glucose sinks, and it's all improving metabolic health. And so there's a direct correlation.
And so now I'm like a huge advocate for everybody who's middle-aged like me, where I say, look, I was you. I was not getting enough exercise. And guess what? There is a way to, or let me put it this way, in particular, to just keep the strength up.
Yeah.
I hate to put it this way, but while I put on some muscle, there's just no getting around it as you get older, especially as a male. Actually, I think it's both males and females. It's just harder to put on muscle.
Sure. Yeah.
But especially as you get older and older, now you have to worry about keeping muscle.
Yeah, because you lose it a lot faster.
And that's a big deal. And that's a conversation I've had with my parents.
Yeah.
So I've said, you do not need to be going to the gym and working like crazy, but you do need to be picking up some things, putting them down, making it part of it.
I've got to be jealous. I mean, I've got to be honest. I am so jealous of the people who grew up on farms and ranches and are just from day one have been moving their bodies in complex motions, lifting and turning and pushing and pulling, and just as a way of life. And that's farmer strong, rancher strong, and that's what I wish we're doing. I mean, gosh, I'm jealous of my son. He'll have a teenage son, and he'd kill me if he knew I was talking about him on a podcast. But he's on the wrestling team, so he wakes up in the morning, goes to the gym, goes to school, afternoon goes to wrestling practice, and he's as fit as a fiddle and amazing. And I'm thinking, that's incredible. But what if he grew up on a farm or a ranch and was just doing that all day long? I bet it would be kind of similar, right? And I don't know, that's a bit of a tangent. You hit a string in me when you said that, because I think it is so important that if we go to the gym and we're on the treadmill for 30 minutes and then we sit all day. Like, I remember growing up, that's what people did. And that was considered okay and healthy. But that's just scratching the surface. And that's actually not what we should be doing. We need to be moving our bodies. We need to be lifting things. We need to be improving our lean mass and our muscle mass in addition to our cardiovascular system. So, yeah, it's so important. Now, how do people fit that into their busy day? How do they fit it into their body and their health the way it is? That's a more nuanced conversation, but we all need to start that.
There are strategies, though. For example, Sharon knows this. Whenever I'm going anywhere, I'm trying to take the stairs.
Right. Simple things like that.
Every single time. If there's an escalator and there's nearby stairs, I take the stairs. Every time.
Yep.
Where it gets kind of comical is when we're at the airport here. You flew in at Harry Reid. There's these long flights where it's like a lot of escalators, and I'll have like my luggage with me, and sort of my one sort of military moment where I'm like trapping my bag and holding it like this, and I try, and I usually run the stairs.
That's great. And everybody looks at you and thinks you're the weirdest person there, because why would you do that? You're doing it because it's a good thing to do for your health.
And it's kind of, but it's opportunistic. That's the catch.
Yeah.
It's the reason you and I can be, because I'm jealous of people that have been on the farm. They just started there.
Yeah.
Right. So they may not even go on to be in some, hyper intensive version of what, but if they even started out that way, they already started building habits of their body already listens for it. So they're already in that mode. And that's where the problem is, if you have a desk job and then you go and hit the gym, it's great. If you're feeling it, if you're getting the good endorphin rush, etc. But the catch is, it's still actually an artificial construct.
Mm-hmm.
Like going to the gym is like your way of going to get exercise. What you were just describing is people whose vocation or their lifestyle already integrated that work.
Right.
And that's why the running the stairs is, good, an opportunity where what I already needed to do was to get from point A to point B on here. I could just skip the escalator and at least find a way to inject that.
Right.
So it's the same thing with travel. There's 2 grocery stores within walking distance of here. not the shortest walk ever. Enough of a walk, though, that I'll try to do it every time, and I'll try to carry the groceries back.
Yeah.
And there's home office here, so occasionally I'm stocking things out of the fridge. I try to always walk to the grocery store and lift all the stuff coming back. And sometimes I, like, legit.
But Dave, you could save like 15 or 20 minutes if you drove.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right? So in our society, it's like, oh, I don't have the time. I got to do it. I got to drive. I got to save the time, as opposed to like, no, take the extra time. It's going to pay off.
You go to Europe, right? Travel to Europe. Travel to Europe.
Actually, I hardly ever traveled to Europe. I just went to Keto Live to Switzerland, and it was amazing.
Okay.
But I haven't had many trips to Europe, I have to admit.
Take some time. Go through Europe.
Yeah.
They smoke and drink more.
And they ride their bikes everywhere, and they walk everywhere.
But they ride their bikes more. Yes. Even if you're taking a lot of public transport, there's going to be a lot of walking in between.
Yeah.
But then you go to a place like freaking Venice. Everyone's walking everywhere.
Yeah.
And you have to walk over those canals, so you have to keep going up and down little stairs at least. And I'm looking at people young and old, really old, who they're all on their feet.
Yeah.
And they're all walking around.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, I know people. I have engineer buddies who, if I said, oh, this is pretty close, it's just a couple blocks, they're like, no, let's just, like, the car's right there. Let's just get in the car. And I'm like,
well, it's the same analogy to what we've normalized with food is what we've normalized with being sedentary or lack of physical activity, and not just even going to the gym, but just daily physical activity. Like, what's rockstar parking? It's right up front. So you have the minimal amount of walking to where you're going. Like, we've just normalized it, and that's a problem.
And that's why I like parking with Sharon. Like, I regularly park way out because I don't want to do it's always weird to me when you circle the parking lot several times to try to get a good spot.
Right.
No.
Especially when it's at the gym, when you're about to get into the treadmill.
So, yeah, I mean, these are just tiny tweaks, I think. And this is I'm not an influencer type. I'm not trying to get into the space of being a coach. But I feel like one thing I can give some insight on that I've observed with doing these experiments is that you can underguess and overguess momentum. A lot of times you're overly focusing on what the first or second or third attempt at something is because you think that's what they're all going to be like.
Yeah.
All these experiments. So the first time I run the stairs, if I hadn't ran it in a while, I'm going to be like, oh, I'm really out of shape. Gosh, it's going to be like this every time. And in my mind, there's a voice going, yes, it's going to be this hard every time. And I can't ever quell that voice.
Yeah.
All I can do is train myself to be like, no, Dave, momentum. You get used to doing this more. So good example being cruise ships. Sharon and I like to go on cruise ships. We have a rule. The rule is we never take the elevator. Both of us take the stairs. And if you do that, if you ever do a cruise, have you ever done a cruise?
Yeah.
Okay.
I get seasick, so I don't love them.
Oh.
But I have done them.
Well, between the Dramamine.
Yeah, right?
Try adopting the same rule.
Yeah, for sure.
I usually lose weight on cruises.
Yeah. But so let me ask you a question about all this with exercise. Do you think we need more research showing the benefits of exercise, or we need to understand that exercise is good for us more?
I mean, that's a great question because of the fact that in my mind, it's like so well established.
Right?
Yeah.
So what's the disconnect, right? The disconnect is how we talk to people about it, how we educate them about it, how we, try to make them recognize what is a societal norm and how that goes against it, right? It's a more detailed discussion as opposed to say, exercise, science shows that exercise is really good for your body and your brain and your mental health, and you should do more of it. If that's your discussion, what kind of success are you going to have there, right?
Yeah. And I don't have a good answer for that one. Like, again, getting back to Europe, you just don't have really an easy choice. Yeah. First of all, petrol, as they would say over there, is crazy expensive. Mm-hmm. Having a vehicle is both expensive and very difficult. It's difficult to own one and to keep it.
Yeah.
Therefore, the society itself is structured in such a way that exercise is imposed on you.
Yeah.
You don't really have much
Right.
choice about it.
Yeah.
Getting back to the informing, I mean, you could have told me before I'd started Dr. Ben's, you could be like, you do know, Dave, that you need to be getting more resistance. I'd be going, yeah.
Yep.
I'm busy. That's what I would say. I've never been a naturally athletic person, and therefore I have to make time to go do this, go to the gym, and I have my spurts where I do get into it for a while. But this is the challenge, right? The challenge is we're informing. You're informing me exercise is good for me. You're informing me of the studies that show exercise is good for me. It's not like that turns the light bulb on that I go, oh, I needed to hear that the 99th time.
Right.
And now, it's the same thing with me and sleep. Sleep is probably my single biggest Achilles heel right now.
But you know how important sleep is for you.
I know how important sleep is for me.
Yeah.
So therefore, I also know I have family members who are absolutely aware that diabetes is killing them. They're aware that the food that they're eating, it's no different than the smoker smoking out of the trachea, whatever tube. It is a challenge to go beyond the informing to how can we put this into practice?
The variable of human nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of good answers on that yet, save my favorite one, which is, and Jan may help us out with this. I wish that we had effectively the same thing as a rehab center. Going back to my friend with this company, have things outside of us, just like Europe is to its citizens, that help to enforce that for you.
Yeah.
Because the more you have the choice of jumping in the car or walking to the store, the more the momentum works against you. You've driven there enough times. Okay, what's one more time? Let's do it again. Same thing with diet.
Yeah.
There's momentum to diet. If I fall off, I'm more likely to stay off or just keep making bad choices.
No, sorry, I had to take a drink there.
Yeah, no. Anyway, all I'm saying is that I think exercise, probably more than diet, is very momentum driven.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can get a good routine going with exercise, your muscles almost call to you. I'm really looking forward to that walk.
Yeah.
I'll say this. One thing that I think helps people to get more exercise, get an animal.
Yes, absolutely.
Get a dog that you have to walk.
Yes, they're the best.
They'll get you walking.
Yeah.
You won't have a choice.
Absolutely. I know when I'm sitting at my office for hours at a time and little guy pokes his head in and he's telling me it's time to go for a walk. And it's better than any alarm clock, that's for sure. Hard to say no to him.
How many dogs do you have?
Just one.
Just one?
Yeah.
But how old?
He is 6. And he's like a lab terrier mix, and he's awesome.
You mentioned you run?
I wish I could say yes. I used to run a lot. I used to compete in triathlons, and it was,
Ironman?
Ironman? Yes.
Did the Ironman?
I did the Ironman. Yeah.
Did you hear about the 80-year-old?
80-year-old who completed the Ironman. Wow. That's amazing.
I don't know about you. When I see something like that, that's a motivator.
Yeah.
I go, I really need to get...
That's amazing.
I need to get into better shape.
It's amazing. It does beat your body up a bit. And I'm at the age where I'm starting to see the effects of the beaten body. So I no longer run thanks to that, but I wish I could. And I definitely can ascribe to getting the runner's high back in the day.
A lot of runners transition over to cycling.
Yeah.
Are you doing that?
Yeah, that I do as much as I can, especially mountain biking. Fortunately, where I live, there's some really good mountain biking.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, and I happen to live right by a canyon, so it's really nice that I can just drop in the canyon and do some mountain biking. So, yeah, that's great. But also, like you said, just there's something about getting out and walking too that is in itself, very meditative and healing and exercise as well. And then, I do spend more time in the gym now, which I think is good for exercise and body composition, but also for efficiency, I've got to say, and look, I can speak to the importance of all these things and, but I agree, sometimes you just got to do what's most efficient. Get in, get out, get your exercise, get on with your day. but try and build in other avenues for walking or other avenues for getting outside and being physically active. Like I said, God, I wish I was on a farm. I wish I was on a ranch. I wish that was my life. It would be much, much healthier.
I visited, for the documentary, Jen Unwin's.
Yeah.
Her and David's house, which has farmland all around.
Yeah.
They have lamb that are just wild. They're not wild, but they're in this gigantic yard, just all this acreage,
right,
which they're just having the time of their life running around. And I was talking about this with Jen Eisenhart, just so jealous.
Yeah.
Because they're just having the freshest meat, the eggs. They had the chickens out there, and they were very happy chickens, just having the time of their lives. And we're just like,
well, everybody needs to experience that. There's such a disconnect between the average person and where food comes from and how food is raised and how food is harvested. And, people complain about here in California, if you're driving on the 5 freeway, there's a spot where you drive by just these cattle farms where they're, on dirt and not on grass, and it's the industrial cattle farms, and it stinks and it just looks bad. And that's what people think about where your meat comes from. Well, that you got to then go to the ranch where they're just roaming free in the grassland, and they're together as a herd, and they're like, can't imagine a better life for an animal than just to be free out wandering around, So you need to experience that. And then you need to experience the monocrop with the fertilizers and the big tillers and just field of nothing but these little crops. And then go to a regenerative farm and see the green grassland and the perennials and the animals coexisting with the plants and the trees and the shade and the beauty of it. And then you can realize, okay, it's not just one thing where food comes from. Everybody needs to experience that.
Yeah, it's the ecosystem that we're ultimately eating.
Yeah.
We're not just eating the meat. We're eating everything that came together that ultimately resulted in the creature. In the case of where it is meat, and same thing with the crop, or whatever it is we're consuming.
Yeah. And that's part of, this Eat Lancet report for the planetary health diet came out, the second version came out. And, when you're trying to calculate something's impact on the environment, so much comes down to the assumptions and the inputs. And to think that plant-based foods sort of by default are beneficial for the environment is such a joke because of the amount of fertilizer and the amount of land they destroy when you monocrop them, and the amount of animals that get killed, small animals that get killed during the process. So much of that, I think, is boiled down to just the belief that it's beneficial. And animals, by default, are harmful because cows burn methane. Therefore, X equals Y, they are harmful, as opposed to what they do for the soil, what they do for the grasslands, what they do for the environment from that standpoint. We just try to boil it down to good and bad and forget about all the intricacies involved. And it's not doing us any favors, that's for sure.
Yeah, and while neither one of us are experts, it's another thing the Bazookies are supporting with regard to us understanding regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
That is sort of another thing I want to get into. I have Peter Ballested on also.
Yeah.
And I want to get a chance to talk about this more. But it's a difference from how it was before. The U.S. was originally a land of agriculture. And there was a lot more interest before this craze of monocropping that does cause a lot of problems with the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a health to the soil. There's literally a biome that's there that's of enormous relevance. So anyway, I was going somewhere with this, and now I forgot what it was I was going with. Anyway,
well, I can interrupt and just say, well, and you mentioned Bazooki's role in this, and Jan Bazooki was an executive producer on the documentary Common Ground. And look, again, I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm not an expert on this, although I love to talk about it and think about it. And I think a great place to start for education is that documentary Common Ground. It's really well done and very eye-opening.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Now I remember where it was that I was going with this. So the bigger issue to me is, in order for us to be able to meet with these assumptions on the calculations, we've got to also care about the sourcing itself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really care about the environment, I could tell you the single biggest thing you could do is eat locally.
Yeah.
Like if the cows that are down the road, or the tomatoes that are across the highway, okay, you want the lowest footprint. That's how you do it. But if you're getting mangoes from intercontinental travel that also got, fertilizer that came from 5 countries away.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at a modern salad that has 8 ingredients, eating the rainbow, look for how many different places they come from.
Yeah.
And how far away they are.
I mean, the hypocrisy is ridiculous. So I forget what it was, the Golden Globes or the Emmys, and they were serving a vegan diet because it was environmentally friendly. How'd everybody get there? They flew in their private jets, they drove in their SUVs. Like, you really think you're impacting the environment? But it's the virtue signaling. Maybe they truly believe it. I don't know, but I don't know. Right? Don't get me started on this. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, it's a challenge because of how politically charged it is.
Yeah,
but it is an important thing when we're talking about health that I think is part of the challenge in seeing that Eat Lancet, diet for the world.
Yeah,
is trying to have some degree of influence based on variables outside of the health itself, the health of the human.
This is what's so interesting, right? It's clearly promoted as healthy for humans and healthy for the planet. And this is what we need to continue to have healthy humans and a healthy planet for the next 50 years. Well, turns out if you look in the paper, and I just had an interview with Dr. Frank Mitloehner, where he pointed this out to me, there's a disclosure section in the paper itself where it says this is based only on, I'm paraphrasing, but basically based only on the human health effects and not truly based on the environmental health effects. And that kind of blew my mind because that goes against everything that's promoted, and especially since it's actually not healthy for humans. It is a nutritionally deficient diet that you have to aggressively supplement and is protein deficient and is not suitable for pregnant women, for kids, or for the elderly. And I would argue for those with metabolic dysfunction, which is now we're talking about the majority of the population. So all of a sudden, this whole thing just crumbles. But yet you would not know that by the media portrayal of it because it is such a charged and such a hard-held belief. And yeah, so I don't know. It was eye-opening for me to hear that from Frank Mitloehner. It's right there in the document. And I had another interview with Dr. Georgia Eid, where she really took apart the human health side of things. So I mean, there's this swell certainly that we're fighting against to say nutrition is not cut and dried. There are so many other factors we have to consider, and there's not one way to eat. The belief that there's one way to eat. I believe that whole foods from plants and animals in a low-carb way is the best way to eat. But I'm not going to impose that on everybody. I'm going to recognize that people can be healthy eating different ways, and they don't have to ascribe to that one way of eating. So for one of the things that bothers me more than anything is for someone to say, this is the way everybody needs to eat, and we need to influence the food systems and the policy and the subsidies and really reward this way of eating and punish other ways of eating. That frustrates me more than anything. We have to push against that no matter what it is. Even if it was low carb and keto is the way we are going to reward everybody to eat and punish every other way, I'd still say, hang on, no. We cannot do that. That's just going a step too far.
I'm actually kind of glad you brought this up because this is a place where I'm at odds with some people in the low carb world. Even though I just mentioned how I feel like added sugar is kind of like the tobacco of our age.
Yeah.
If you were to put a bill in front of me, so would you sign on to something that bans added sugar? I wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know why? Because even if I thought that would be of a benefit, I also know that in 5 seconds, they're going to be like, and let's also throw in saturated fat.
Exactly. And red meat.
And red meat. Right. Exactly. Right.
Right.
Just as we were talking about with science, you need to have epistemic humility. You need to concede that what you know today may change tomorrow. And therefore, at the point where we actually impose policy on how people eat, so it's not even related to market forces on what's available, supply and demand, but that we're actually going to impose what you are free to consume.
Yeah.
That's a big step.
Look, I'm going to say something controversial here. As a clinician, as an individual, as a health conscious person, I don't think anybody should be eating ultra processed foods. That's not the controversial part. If you ask me how strong is the science to support that, gotta say it's pretty weak. We do not have strong science to support that claim. I believe it. So when it comes to should we be regulating this, and I mean, a lot comes into the definition of ultra processed, what it means, and I think it's a lot trickier than it seems, and we don't really have the strong science. Now, when it comes to refined carbohydrates, that's where I think we really do have the science and can then back that up a little bit more. So it is tricky, but ultra-processed foods is the boogeyman. Like, who could disagree with getting rid of ultra-processed foods, right? You'd have to be crazy. Like, it's so clear. Scientifically, it's not so clear.
But let's say we took it to refined carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Would you support a law that banned or minimized refined carbohydrates?
Oh, I mean, there is that slippery slope, right? I agree. There's the slippery slope. I think we should do what we can to educate people about the risk of it, and not do anything that supports it, like giving subsidies for corn, wheat, and soy, which go into refined carbohydrates, right? To actively support it kind of seems a little bit the wrong direction, right? So yeah, we got to get rid of all of that and focus on whole foods, and if you're going to subsidize anything, subsidize whole foods, plants and animals, right? And so when you talk about controversies, right, what about, well, plant foods have anti-nutrients and they're poison. They don't want to be eaten, and it's not natural to eat them. We should only be eating meat. That's a message we hear too, right? And for some people, that transforms their health to get rid of plants. Absolutely. Does that mean everybody should eat that way? Absolutely not. There are plenty of people who thrive eating plants. And I mean, talk about cravings. I've tried going carnivore. I've never craved vegetables so much in my life as when I went carnivore. Like, I craved it. I think my body was telling me something. That's my experience. Other people don't have that experience. Eating vegetables is absolutely consistent with healthy and thriving as part of a, omnivore type diet. I wholly stand by that statement. Not for everybody, right?
And that's why the policy considerations concern me.
Yeah.
And it's why it takes enormous levels of evidence for me to feel confident enough. I don't even want to talk about, like, I'm not even going to mention, but there are things for which probably there's, for most people, an assumption of there's enough evidence in order for us to have, made it no longer available. But I just have a high bar. Brett, I just generally have a high bar for causality.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with being told that it's too high. I'd rather err on the side of too high for claiming causality than too low.
Right.
Okay, we've been going for a while now. Is there anything else that you want to be sure to fit into the conversation before we wrap?
Oof. Good question. I mean, I really wanted to talk about the Coalition for Metabolic Health so people understood what it is. This group of clinicians and scientists and philanthropists and really trying to forward the concept that metabolic health first. And, if I can make one change with the way medicine is practiced, with the way nutrition is practiced, which the way, governmental policy informs what is healthy, it would be outcome-based metabolic health. We do what we have to do to improve our metabolic health. And that should be the focus, rather than leaning on the dogma of this is healthy, this is not healthy, without an eye towards the outcome and being accountable for the outcome. So we're hoping by bringing this group together, it will improve research, it'll improve policy, it'll improve clinical practice, and it'll improve individual understanding. So we're brand new, coalitionformetabolichealth.org. I just hope people check it out and that it starts to spread.
I'm excited. I think it's going to be, I'm I've seen so much that's happened in just the last couple years. So my fingers are crossed that we just see more success.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for joining.
My
Bret.
pleasure.
It's been great.
Yeah. So you're always so easy to talk to and so enjoyable to talk to, which is probably why I've had you on my podcast so many times. And I got to be honest, when it comes to like real long form, like multi-hour podcasts, I'm like, who can do that? Who can sit and talk for that long? But here we are. I didn't think I was going to do it. So you brought it out of me. So thank you.
So let's end off with how people can find you in particular.
Yeah, so a couple different places. Metabolicmind.org is where we have our content for Metabolic Mind, and the YouTube page for Metabolic Mind. I have a new blog series at coalitionformetabolichealth.org. And then I still have my virtual cardiology practice at lowcarbcardiologist.com. So a couple different places to find me.
All right. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.